Chapter 20. Amber City was unusually quiet at night. Ever since the skinning incident, no one dared to come out at night in Amber City or nearby areas. Even those who were active in the Grey Realm were now on tenterhooks in their own territories. The Dark Realm was made up of pure evil and chaotic lunatics. Although the Grey Realm had a lot of contact with them, they had always maintained their boundaries. The guards of Amber City had yet to find anything. Not only did the nobles repeatedly ask them to solve the problem as soon as possible, but the church also began to put pressure on them. Panic spread further, and the Church of Amber City finally lost patience with the guards and began to send their own paladins to investigate. Unfortunately, those evil beings were extremely cunning. Not only did they not find any clues, but they also lost a comrade. Their comrade's corpse was hung on the city gate the next day, and next to it was a complete human skin. Fear brewed in the night. The attack of the evil god's followers on the paladins eventually led to the church's wrath. The churches of the three lawful gods began to send out high-level paladins, and even the bishops in charge of the nearby areas joined in the action. At the same time, in a secret underground chamber, there were many strange carvings on the four walls. There were bones, lava, demons, altars, and the shadow of a demon shrouded in darkness. Dark phosphorescent flames flickered, casting an eerie light on the surroundings. A group of believers in black robes knelt under the altar, their hands crossed as they prayed on the ground. On the altar was a red-robed priest whose face could not be seen clearly. He held a crystal ball in his pale hand, and his mouth was chanting ancient demonic language. Lord High Priest. According to the prophecy left by our Lord, the first child of fear will awaken in despair and fear. But we did not sense the presence of the child of fear. The skinning ritual has begun. The aura of fear is spreading in this city. But the paladins of the church are about to discover us. We have already lost some people. Now, should we continue with the ritual? To wait for the awakening of the child of fear? A ball of demonic purple flame appeared. A hoarse voice that could not be identified reverberated throughout the secret chamber. It slowly said, "The prophecy has been interfered with. The gods seem to have sensed my lord's arrangements. Continue the sacred skinning ritual and spread the power of fear to the southern principality. The second child of fear will awaken on a certain sunset." The red-robed priest knelt down piously. He looked forward with a firm gaze and said in a deep voice, "The ceremony will continue. My lords shall envelop the abyss." Below the altar, the believers of the evil god kneeling on the ground began to pray, and waves of evil energy gathered in this secret room. No one was allowed to enter Amber City at night. Especially after the skinning incident, more guards were placed at the city gate, and the activities of other people were strictly interrogated. Therefore, Soren had to stay outside the city for a night and find a way to enter the temple district the next day. Dawn Shrine. A faint radiance enveloped the hall. The surroundings were filled with an aura of tranquility, serenity, and hope. This was a solidified blessing spell. With the help of the divine power gathered in the temple, believers could feel spiritual satisfaction after entering it. A small figure knelt in front of a tall and majestic statue. Priestess Annalyn slowly opened the door and looked at the little girl in front of the shrine. She whispered, "Vivian, are you praying to the Lord of Dawn?" The little girl gently raised her head and looked at the girl behind her. She nodded obediently and said, "Yes. I'm praying that he will protect my brother." Although Soren did not say it, Vivian knew that he was going to do something very dangerous. The little girl did not try to stop him. She just prayed for Soren in her heart and prayed that the gods would bring him a trace of luck. No matter what god it was, it would do. The priestess walked to her side and reached out to stroke her little head. She said slowly, "Then you should pray at dawn. The Lord of Dawn will listen to the prayers of his believers at that time." The little girl nodded as if she understood and said, "That's good. Sister, please pray with me tomorrow." Annalyn looked at the cute little girl in front of her and nodded with a smile. She then said, "Vivian, are you willing to believe in the Lord of Dawn? I can feel that you have a unique talent. Perhaps you have the potential to become a priestess. If you are willing to serve the Lord of Dawn, your family can also be accommodated by the shrine. Perhaps Soren can find a better job in the future. After all, he is quite skilled." The little girl fell into deep thought after hearing this. She seemed to be a little tempted, but she quickly replied, "I want to ask my brother before I make a decision. If my brother agrees, I would like to give it a try." She did not know why. When Vivian said, "Give it a try," she felt an inexplicable sense of rejection in her heart. She had been very perceptive since she was young. However, she did not know why, but she did not like the gods. That was why she and Soren were both non-believers. They did not even believe in a god on the surface. The little girl did not know why, but she felt that if she was asked to believe in them, she would feel uncomfortable. For example, the light in the temple was very comfortable when it shone on people, but she still didn't like it. If it were not for the fact that she wanted to pray for Soren, she would not even want to enter the shrine. That's good. The priestess showed a hint of joy. She reached out to pull her up and said slowly, perhaps you can try to understand some of the most basic divine spells. For example, this. Yue. Annalyn uttered a strange syllable. Then a ray of light appeared on her fingertips. The light was like a candlelight, illuminating everything nearby. This is illumination. The priestess smiled as she looked at the little girl in front of her. It's a very simple divine spell. If you have the talent to become a priestess, you should be able to master it quickly. However, you have to undergo baptism first. The holy ceremony will allow you to feel the power of the gods. The baptism ceremony was the key to becoming a priestess. It was a process of strengthening and magnifying one's senses. During this process, those who had the talent to become a priestess would be able to feel the power of the divine spell. This included paladins, rangers, and other professions. They would be able to gradually master some low-level divine spells after this ceremony. However, this was only the beginning of the ceremony. There would be more important holy ceremonies for the priestess to advance. Asterisk clang. Asterisk, a loud noise outside the hall interrupted the priestess' words. Then a fully armored paladin walked in. The armor on his body was unusually heavy. When he walked in, it made clanging sounds. There was a trace of blood on his resolute face. After entering the hall, he said to Annalyn in a deep voice, Matos is injured. We found the nest of the fallen. Matos was stabbed in the heart during the battle. Sophia's expression changed slightly. She looked at Vivian and said, go back to your room later. Lasco. Bring me there. The two quickly left. Recently, the followers of the evil god had been very rampant. The evil skinning ceremony had alarmed many paladins. The Dawnlight Shrine's paladins had also participated in the operation. Matos was a Tier 3 paladin. His profession level was above level 10. Even he was heavily injured in the battle. It seemed that the followers of the evil god were very powerful this time. Vivian silently watched the two leave. After they left, she raised her white and tender fingertips and muttered to herself, Can I use divine spells just by saying this syllable? A strong light appeared. The little girl opened her mouth wide in shock. She looked at the light that erupted from her fingertips. She seemed to be in disbelief. She seemed to be a little scared. He quickly flicked his finger as if trying to extinguish the light. However, she quickly adapted to it. She curiously looked at her fingertips and muttered, Is it really that simple? Can I use divine spells just like this? Chapter 21. Soren's wounds healed quite well. By the second day, there were basically no traces of his wounds when he walked. Only when he exercised vigorously would he feel a little inconvenience. If the wounds didn't open up, it would take at most 2 days for him to fully recover. This was the main reason why Soren wanted to increase his constitution by 20 points. If he could increase his constitution by 1 point, he could completely recover from this degree of injury within a day with his regeneration ability. After all, the treasure cave was only a low-level adventure location. If he wanted to go deep into some underground ruins or a higher-level adventure location, it could even take more than a month. This included not only the time spent exploring the ruins, but also the survival events encountered on the way, as well as the possibility of accidents. Therefore, Constitution greatly affected the survival ability of adventurers. For example, Soren once met an idiotic mage who actually used enhanced bursting fireball in a narrow underground cave. In the end, the whole cave collapsed. Although his teammates were all high-grade professions, there were no casualties. However, they were trapped underground for an entire week. In the end, they had to dig out a tunnel with their bare hands. So, please remember to stay away from those mages with low IQ. Sometimes they were more dangerous than monsters. Of course, this wasn't the worst thing. Even worse was the work of a priest. He actually used an earthquake spell in the underground ruins. In the end, a large area of the underground ruins collapsed. Most of the loot was destroyed by the earthquake, and all of his teammates were buried hundreds of meters underground. In the end, only a special dwarf warrior with more than 25 constitution crawled out alive. This priest was finally known as the worst creature, and it could be said that he was the nightmare of all adventurers. However, basically, this kind of behavior was done by the players. The original inhabitants of the story were all experts. Sometimes they could even use a low-level spell to turn the situation around. Unfortunately, the original inhabitants of the story were the most difficult to become teammates. Before Soren went to pick up Vivian, he first went to the secret shop. The city gate was heavily guarded, and they took the traveling expenses of outsiders very seriously. After the skinning incident started to ferment, there were already signs of it becoming more and more serious. However, Soren knew that all this was just the beginning. In his memory, the skinning incident was an evil chain of sacrificial rituals. The final scope of the incident covered the entire southern region. There were a total of 6 kingdoms, 18 duchies, 31 city-states, and more than 300 cities. At that time, there were at least 200,000 players involved in the plot, and more than 20 legendary professions were directly drawn out. It could be said that this period of time was when the players were at their weakest. Soren carefully recalled everything in his memory, trying to deduce the current time. The skinning incident had just begun, and the ancient red dragon had yet to appear. In other words, there was still about a year before the gods lost their divine powers and were forced to descend as saints. In addition to some special events, he should have about 2 years to accumulate strength. 2 years later, something very serious was about to happen. The goddess of magic had fallen, and the magic net had completely collapsed. All wizards had temporarily lost their ability to cast spells. The goddess of magic was a powerful deity, and she was also the first to be hit during the Age of Chaos. She was in charge of the magic net in countless planes, and she helped wizards cast spells. This was the spell slot ability that the adepts were using now. There were many wizards at this stage, so basically every city had a secret shop. It was only after the goddess of magic had fallen that the number of wizards began to decrease. With the fall of the goddess of magic, the magic net had lost its maintainer, and the magic net began to collapse on a large scale, causing wizards to completely lose their spell slots. All adepts with intelligence below 18 will lose the ability to cast spells. All wizards with intelligence below 20 would only be able to cast the lowest level of level 0 cantrips. Only wizards with intelligence above 20 would be able to use their own ability to observe and analyze the laws of the world, and then gradually recover their ability to cast spells. However, at that time they would no longer use the spell slots on the magic net, but their own mana and understanding of the laws. The magic net was a convenience, but it was also a restriction on the power of spells. It could allow wizards with insufficient talent, intelligence below 18, to cast spells more easily, but at the same time, it also restricted powerful wizards, intelligence above 18, from becoming terrifying great arcanists. Ever since then, wizards began to walk towards two extremes, either extremely useless or extremely abnormal. However, these were all things for the future. At this stage, the magic net was still operating normally. All wizards gave their mana to the magic net, borrowing the power of the goddess of magic in exchange for spell slots. Although this required them to frequently memorize spells. Soren sorted out his memories in his mind, because the fall of the goddess of magic was a very important event. The resulting turbulence affected countless planes. During that time, the value of rare items soared several times. Now, the value of a low-level multidimensional bag that cost 100 Kindler coins could skyrocket to more than 500 Kindler coins. Because with the fall of the goddess of magic, many gods also fell in the mortal world. Many priests and droll also lost their ability to cast spells. Only those who had broken through 20 points in related attributes and entered the realm of transcendence could rely on their own strength to gain insight into the world's rules. Gradually recover their ability to cast spells. This period was not far away. If Soren remembered correctly, the goddess of magic was the first to fall, and wizards would soon lose their ability to cast spells. Then the era of arcane revival would begin. The arcane shop was actually very inconspicuous. This was because wizards did not like to communicate with ordinary people, and even other professions found it difficult to come into contact with them. Among all the spellcasting professions, only priests were more down to earth. Soren gently pushed open a wooden door. The inside of the arcane shop was very spacious, and there were only a few counters with some enchanted equipment. There were actually very few customers here. This was because the items here were very expensive, and ordinary people could not afford them. For sale or for purchase? An old man lazily glanced at Soren. He wore a pair of glasses and held a book as thick as a brick in his hand. After looking up at Soren, he said indifferently, "If you're selling enchanted equipment, let me evaluate its value. If you're buying enchanted equipment, feel free to look around." The arcane shop was established by the Wizard Alliance, and it was basically located in most cities. There were wizards above grade 2 who would rotate every once in a while. At this time, the Wizard Alliance was still relatively strong and prosperous. After the fall of the goddess of magic, their strength began to decline on a large scale. At that time, many people took advantage of the situation to rob the arcane shop. But now doing so would be suicide. The old man seemed to have seen through Soren's profession and reminded him, "Don't touch the things here. There are magic traps on them." Everyone knew that a thief's hands were the most dishonest. Of course, Soren would not seek death. Instead, he took out the 2 snake demon longswords from his back and directly placed them in front of the old man. This was a grade 3 wizard. His profession should be above grade 10 scholar or grade 10 wizard. Killing Soren would only be a matter of minutes. The old man glanced at the snake demon longswords and showed a hint of surprise. He whispered, "Abyssal fire rock?" He struggled to pick up the long sword and touched the blade with his finger. Wizards did not have high strength, and their constitution was also much lower than other professions. Only after reaching the realm of legends could they strengthen themselves through special rituals. The old man carefully observed for a moment, then retracted his finger and said, "Such a material is actually used to forge weapons. It's a bit of a waste." The old man glanced at Soren and did not ask about the origin of the weapon. He only said, 80 Kindler. The arcane shop had its own channels. As long as it was a rare grade equipment, they would accept it without asking about its origin, whether it was stolen goods or not. Wizards never complained about having too much money. They spent it even faster. 120 Kindler. After hearing the old man's price, Soren could not help but frown. He slowly said, "This sword was forged from abyssal fire rock. According to the rules of weapon pricing, the price of great swords should be around 50%. Whether this sword is sold or recycled, it should be worth 200 Kindler or more. If it can be transported to the north or the grasslands, it can be worth 300 Kindler. That's more than double the profit. 80 Kindler is too little. If it was sold to the Thieves' Union, the price would be even higher." The old man looked at Soren with a bit of surprise. He then said, "You know the market. That's good. 120 Kindler it is." The old man gently shook the bell, and then a heavy figure walked out from behind. It was a stone golem about 2 meters tall, a type of alchemical construct. The golem took the snake demon sword with both hands and walked through the back door. It then carried an inconspicuous bag behind the old man. It was a multi-dimensional bag. The old man reached out and opened the multi-dimensional bag, pouring it out onto the counter. A pile of Kindler glittering with golden light appeared. He glanced at it and waved his finger. The Kindler was divided into 2 piles. The small pile flew into the multi-dimensional bag, and the big pile was pushed in front of Soren. Mage Hand. It was a very convenient ability. Mages were indeed rich. After the old man took the 2 snake demon swords, he looked back at the book and said casually, "Feel free to look around. If you want to buy anything, just let me know." 240 Kindler. There was a small pile of Kindler weighing 12 pounds, about 5 kilograms. It was not convenient to carry them around. Sometimes it would even affect one's fighting ability. Soren reached out and took out a small half of the pile, exactly 100 Kindler. He then said, "I want a low-level multi-dimensional bag." The old man nodded and put away the Kindler. He then took out an inconspicuous bag from the drawer. "Be careful not to damage it." He glanced at Soren. Perhaps because he found him pleasing to the eye, he reminded him, "It's only protected by the lowest level of enchantment. It won't be damaged by normal use, but if it's damaged by someone, the things inside will fall out." Soren nodded and put away the 140 Kindler. A low-level multi-dimensional bag had a space of 3 feet. The size of the pocket was about half a foot and it could store smaller things. If it was damaged in an attack, it would lose its storage ability. The small space inside would collapse and the items would fall out. They could even be lost in a spatial rift. There was a high chance that rare items below legendary would be damaged. Even Soren's ogre gauntlet could be damaged in a battle. Some of them could even be damaged beyond repair. The trade was complete. Soren quickly left the arcane shop and walked towards the blacksmith shop near the square. He needed a machete. It was difficult to buy a rare machete in the south. He could only buy a military machete for now. A row of data appeared. Negotiation successful. You have successfully raised the value of the item through negotiation. Valuation +1, negotiation +1. Chapter 22. Amber City. As a city that had been established for more than 600 years, Amber City's history began when the Agate River changed its course. Due to the large-scale desertification of the plains upstream and the epic scale of the Mad Serpent Rebellion, the relationship between the human kingdoms and the Droll worsened, and the Agate River's course was shifted by nearly 60 kilometers. Even to this day, the Droll still restricted humans from destroying the natural environment, and when necessary they would resort to violence. The change of the Agate River's course led to the decline of a city, but it also led to the rise of Amber City. Unlike the dirty and messy slums, Amber City's streets were much wider and cleaner. The paved roads could allow 10 carriages to pass at the same time. However, such cleanliness was built on driving away the homeless and poor. Every time they entered Amber City, they would have to spend a copper dural. The poor and vagrants of the lower class could not afford that kind of money. Even if they were lucky enough to sneak into the city, they would be caught patrolling at night and thrown out by the guards again. Such situations were common in the southern cities. The inside and outside of the city were two completely different worlds. As for the noble district, it was as beautiful as a garden. Flowers and trees were planted on both sides of the road, and tall buildings and exquisite sculptures could be seen everywhere. Even Soren could not enter the district as it was guarded by nobles. The Great Square was Amber City's big market. It was responsible for trading goods transported from all over the world, and it brought in a lot of taxes to Amber City every year. At the same time, it also ensured that the nobles had a source of income. The annual income of a manor was less than 10 Kindler coins. For the nobles, the best way to accumulate wealth and strengthen their families was to get involved in the transportation trade on the Agate River. Soren saw many heavily guarded guards along the way. The skinning incident had caused Amber City to seem a little desolate. After hurriedly selling their goods, the merchants left the city. Their past experiences told them that there would always be many troublesome and dangerous things happening in the area where the realm of darkness was active. Directly opposite the Great Square was the Adventurers Guild. It was a large and loose organization that was spread all over the world, but the management staff was formed by various forces. Be it kingdoms, nobles, churches, or other organizations scattered all over the world, none of them would allow the Adventurers Guild to form a complete will. Therefore, they had to ensure that there was a force of their own in this large and loose organization. The Adventurers Guild was made up of various boards, and each area operated independently. For example, the Adventurers Guild in Amber City covered all the jobs within a 500-kilometer radius, including 3 cities, 21 towns, and more than 100 villages. The members of the council were controlled by nobles, churches, local forces, and so on. They were on the same level as the Adventurers Guilds all over the world, but they maintained some agreements of common interests. Soren needed an adventurer's identity. There were no requirements to become an adventurer, and there was no strength evaluation. You just needed to be able to afford the application fee. There were a total of 10 Kindlers. It was enough to sustain a family of 3 for 3 years. All adventurers started from F class and had a secret imprint on them that could be verified by adventurer guilds all over the world. Of course, if you are strong enough, you can also forge it. The biggest use of an adventurer's identity was a pass, because there were many places that you could not go as you wished. This world had a strong sense of geography. The movement of people was also very slow because there were too many dangers in the wild. Many ordinary people would never leave their homes for more than 10 kilometers in their lifetime. If you only wanted to move around your home, you would not need those things. But if you wanted to go to other places, there were 2 things that you had to prepare. The first was an identity of a free person, and the second was an identity of an adventurer. These 2 things could eliminate a lot of hostility and trouble. Of course, if you could get a noble's identity, it would be even easier. You could also pretend to be one. As long as you did not expose yourself, it would be very troublesome. Soren first needed to prepare an adventurer's identity for himself, and then he and Vivian's identity as free people. This way they could move freely in most of the southern areas. If you did not have these things, many towns and villages would refuse to let you in. Even if you had these identities, if you entered places that were more xenophobic and had a strong sense of geography, there would still be garrison captains who would talk to you. Then they would seriously warn you not to cause trouble here. That was true. Because at that time, many people excitedly went out to adventure, and then everywhere they went, they would be checked again and again. In the end, they would become the focus of attention. As long as you did something wrong, there would immediately be local residents who would report to the garrison, and then there would be fully armed soldiers who would come to talk to you. If you did not really come into contact with it, it was hard to imagine how troublesome it was. There were not many people in the Adventurers Guild. Because this was a dangerous job and it was also a job that was easy to retire from. As long as there was an accident in battle, your body could be left with injuries that were difficult to recover from, and then your strength would be greatly reduced. If you were unable to pay for the expensive treatment, then you should be ready to retire. The Adventurers Guild had countless F-class adventurers, but only 1 in 10 could reach E-class, and less than 1 in 100 could reach D-class. However, if you had the identity of an E-class adventurer and a clean family background with no criminal record, then you could easily find a job as a guard near a town. Although the income was not as good as that of an adventurer, it was still a reliable source of income. It was enough for you to get married, have children, and have children. After all, not everyone had the desire to take risks, and the risks were taken with their lives. The missions that were posted here were more formal. Many of the low-level missions were privately entrusted to individuals, and would not be handled by the Adventurers Guild. The lowest level of mission here was F-class, and the difficulty of the mission was generally above level 5. For example, the mission that Soren saw in front of him was recorded as follows: a village called Snada, which belongs to Lord Tenedo's territory. Recently, a group of goblins appeared, and there were traces of gnolls among them. The village's militia could not fight these monsters, so they offered 50 Kindler's coins as a reward to the adventurers to clear these monsters. Mission rating, F+. This was only the basic description of the mission. If you wanted to accept the mission, you had to consider whether you could defeat a group of goblins, more than 20 of them, and a single-digit number of gnolls, 1 to 5 of them. This was only the beginning. If you decided to accept the mission and head to the destination, you had to find out if the number of enemies was as high as they said. If there were so many of them, you could prepare a battle plan now. But if the number of enemies was much higher than what was recorded, you had to make a decision whether to give up the mission and ask for compensation, travel expenses, or continue the mission and ask for more rewards, negotiation. Or you could not care less and be prepared to take the money and leave after solving the problem. Soren still remembered the first time he accepted a mission. At that time, he found 2 companions, and the difficulty of the mission was similar to the one he was facing now. But in the end, an ogre appeared. He had almost lost his life there. If the client did not raise the reward by 50% in the end, he even had the intention to kill the client. This was not a joke. Soren had done it before. He once hung a client who lied to him about the difficulty of the mission and caused the death of one of his teammates on a flagpole. He whipped the client to death and hung the corpse for 3 days and 3 nights. That was his first storyline native teammate, a big boy named Cheb who smiled a little shyly. He had 2 younger brothers and a younger sister. Before persuading him to become a teammate and leave the village, Soren had promised his mother that he would earn enough money to repair the damaged village after the mountain flood, and then return safely. He was the only professional in the remote village, a level 6 excellent warrior. He saved Soren's life once, blocked 3 arrows for him, and in the end fell into the encirclement in order to protect him. When Soren found him, only half of his corpse was left after being eaten by the gnolls. Even the whole corpse could not be found. That day, Soren killed many people. But revenge did not ease the pain in his heart. In the end, he could only cremate his comrades' ashes and send them back to his hometown. More than 1,000 Kindler's reward from the mission did not give him the courage to face the sad face of a poor mother who lost her child. He had promised that he would bring the shy boy back alive, but in the end, he only brought back a handful of ashes. At that moment, Soren clearly understood how cruel the world was. As a rogue, he would never let his guard down and would never easily trust anyone, because he had already missed his chance. Perhaps it was because of this that he was able to stand out from the other rogues, and finally become one of the few legendary rogues among the players. Chapter 23. The Adventurers Guild didn't have any quests to look for Tom, Dick, or Harry. This was a place where people risked their lives in exchange for riches and honor. Even the lowest level quests could earn them more than 10 Kindler coins. It was enough to feed a normal family for 3 years. Soren didn't accept any quests. After proving his identity and receiving the badge of the Adventurers Guild, he went straight to the city hall. He needed to get himself and Vivian an identity certificate as free citizens, which cost about 15 Kindler coins. Then he would be considered a citizen of Amber City, officially turning from a pauper to a citizen. He would have relative freedom and could move around most of the kingdoms in the south if he didn't have to worry about the dangers in the wild. However, he couldn't touch any quests yet. In Clash of the Titans, there was no such thing as farming monsters. The number of monsters in the wild was about the same as the number of humans. Once you cleared an area of gnolls, there would be no traces of gnolls for a long time until the gnolls from other areas migrated over. Monsters wouldn't stand in a row and eat fruits with you. They would set up traps, ambush you, surround you, set up camps, and run away when the situation wasn't right. There was once such a saying in a tavern. A newbie who hasn't fallen into a kobold's trap, been surrounded by a group of goblins, and been ambushed by gnolls in the middle of the night won't have a complete adventuring career. Behind this saying was a bloody price to pay. Many newbies who had just leveled up to Tier 2 excitedly went out adventuring, only to lose their lives at the hands of the lowest level monsters. Can you imagine a group of monsters that didn't follow the rules? They attacked when they saw a lone player and ran when they saw a large group. They knew how to take advantage of the environment. They could even make bombs, set up simple traps in the forest, investigate, ambush, beg for mercy and cheat. If you were unlucky. Even among the level 1 kobolds, it was possible to meet a talented dragon disciple warlock. Even if they were only level 5, they could still blast you to smithereens. In the wild, complex and unpredictable situations, even the prideful spellcasters didn't dare to think that they could deal with all the unexpected situations. As long as one had money, many problems would become simple. Soren didn't have any trouble obtaining his identity as a freedman. As long as he didn't have a criminal record, the staff of the city hall would be able to help him with everything in half an hour and stamp it with the secret seal of the city lord. They didn't care if Soren used to be a thief or not. They only cared about the shiny kindler. Even if he had a criminal record, it could be easily erased. The so-called freedmen were actually just people who spent money to buy an identity. If you had more money, you could even buy the title of honorary citizen through donations, just like the representatives. Many of the leaders of the gangs were prominent figures in the city. Even if they didn't have the title of nobility, they would still have the title of honorary citizen. With the identity of an adventurer, things would be much easier. Soren could directly purchase military weapons from the smithy. The price of these weapons was several times higher than normal weapons, and their quality was also higher. The public sale of weapons was legal. This was because ordinary people couldn't afford these weapons at all, and they wouldn't be willing to buy such expensive equipment. A military-issue machete cost 15 gold dirhams. It was made with the folding and refining of steel, and it didn't have any extraordinary enchantments. It weighed about 6 pounds and was mixed with a certain amount of black steel. This was the price of a standard weapon. A military chainmail was made with the buckle process, and it weighed about 15 pounds. It also didn't have any extraordinary enchantments, and it cost 80 kindler, which was equivalent to the entire fortune of an ordinary citizen. The price of a standard building in the outer district of Amber City was currently around 30 to 50 kindler. As for the more advanced plate armor and full-body plate armor, it was something that many warriors had worked hard to obtain for a long time. It was more expensive than many extraordinary equipment. A full-body plate armor cost 1,500 to 2,000 kindler. Currently, only the nobles, lesser lords, could equip themselves with such armor. Even many high-grade adventurers couldn't afford it. Such plate armor could be exchanged for a small farm of about 150 acres. After Soren finished his business, he had spent half a day. He still had nearly 100 kindler left in his pocket. This was not a small fortune. If it was just an ordinary life, it would be enough for him and Vivian to live for more than 10 years. However, Soren already had his own ideas, so he had to prepare some daily necessities and wilderness supplies. Yes, he planned to leave here. According to his memory, the turmoil caused by the serial skinning incident was far more than this. The entire southern region would gradually be filled with war. The safest place now was the Elven Kingdom. At least that was the case before the ancient red dragon appeared. The Avatar crisis couldn't be stopped at all. If he didn't want to be obliterated like an ant, then the best way was to leave the turbulent area and accumulate strength in a relatively safe place. Once upon a time, about 3 million players directly interfered and joined the turbulent era of the Avatar crisis. At that time, the most powerful player among the players had a profession level of 18. It could be said that he was only half a step away from legendary, but he was still easily obliterated by those saints. It was impossible to calculate how many people died. Tens of millions of professionals were obliterated like chickens and dogs. This was not something that could be changed by human power. It was the wisest choice. Soren still remembered how powerless he was when he fought against the Son of God. It was not a battle at all. Only after entering the legendary realm could he really have the power to challenge divinity. He entered the Elven Kingdom from the Forest of Dreams, and then turned to the Snow Kingdom, avoiding the most chaotic 3 years, waiting for the first batch of gods to fall. At that time, the broken divinity would be obtained by many mortals. These mortals who had divinity but lacked power. They would be the easiest targets to hunt. This was the biggest opportunity in the turbulent years. Soren didn't grasp it before, but now he could start to plan in advance. The Temple District. When he went to the Temple of Dawn to pick up Vivian, Soren was also playing with the weapon he had just obtained. He needed to familiarize himself with the weapon's length, weight, and feel to ensure that he could use it properly in battle. It was good that he had the military weapon mastery ability, but the weight and feel of each weapon was different. Even if it was standard military equipment, there would still be some slight differences in it. These were very important details because fighting was a matter of life and death in an instant. A row of data appeared in front of him. Item type, military machete. Item grade, refined weapon. Item description, a weapon made of folded forged steel. Whether in terms of toughness or strength, it is far superior to ordinary weapons. Only those blacksmiths with 150 weapon smithing skill and above can forge such equipment. Requirements, 10 strength or above. Effects, black steel trait +1 sharpness. Strictly speaking, this machete was somewhat enchanted because it had a black steel trait, which meant that it had a certain degree of strength. In the process of battle, the weapon would not be easily damaged and it could withstand a lot of slashing attacks. As for the +1 sharpness at the back, it was an attribute of a refined weapon, which could easily penetrate some leather armor. When Soren arrived at the Dawnlight Shrine, he realized that the atmosphere inside was unusually solemn. Pastor Phil was conducting a funeral for a shrine guard. 5 heavily armored warriors stood around him with solemn expressions, their hands holding onto their swords as they stabbed into the ground. Their mottled cloaks were still stained with dried blood. When the pastor finished his last prayer, they knelt on one knee on the ground. Their armor made a clanking sound as they looked forward and solemnly said, "Go forward courageously, do not fear the strong. Protect the weak, uphold justice. Treat others humbly, be honest and loyal. My beloved, be loyal and unswerving. Brave and righteous, rather die than submit. In the name of God, I swear to show my sincerity." The powerful words of the vow echoed in the shrine. Pastor Phil slowly closed the eyes of the deceased. This was a paladin of the Dawnlight Shrine. His hands were holding onto the hilt of his sword in front of his chest. He was wearing a neat set of armor. Although the bloodstains had been wiped clean, there were still many traces of battle left behind. The coffin was very simple. There were no flowers or decorations. The only things buried with him were his armor and weapons. Armor and weapons were a warrior's second life. These equipment that had accompanied him in battle would be buried with him. May his soul enter the kingdom of the Dawnlight Shrine as soon as possible. Pastor Phil raised his hand and sprinkled some holy water. As the pastor prayed, a ray of holy light shone from the shrine. This meant that the Dawnlight Shrine knew that a brave believer had died in battle. His emissary would guide this warrior's soul into the kingdom of God. There the warrior's soul would be reborn. The purer the soul, the more powerful it would be in the kingdom of God. The descent of holy light? Looks like he was very determined when he was alive. After the kingdom of God was reborn, he wasn't just a petitioner. Soren looked around and quickly found Vivian's small figure. She was standing behind the priestess, silently watching the simple but solemn funeral. The nature of a warrior determined that they would always be on the front lines. They were the group of people who were most likely to die in battle. Therefore, no matter how strong they were, one should always respect those who were loyal to their mission and used their bodies to protect their comrades. Soren bowed slightly to pay his respects. This was a valiant warrior. His tattered armor represented the glory of a warrior. P.S. 2 updates will be released at the same time. It'll be more enjoyable if you read it at the same time. However, the click-through rate of the book isn't high. If you want to read it later, I won't release it. Chapter 24. Soren waited quietly. When the funeral was over, he walked up to Vivian and nodded to the priestess. "Thank you for your help these past 2 days. I'm going to take her with me." Vivian's face lit up when she saw Soren. She held one of Soren's fingers and said happily, "Big brother, you're back." The priestess had a sad expression on her face, as if she was still grieving for the dead. She glanced at Soren and frowned. Priestesses usually had strong senses. Before this, Soren was like a gangster on the streets. Although he was good at fighting, he had never experienced a real battle. But now, Soren was like a warrior to her. He had the same aura as the temple guards. It was a murderous aura. Most of the temple guards here were retired from the battlefield, or they had experienced many battles. How could Soren change so much in such a short time? Did he experience something in the past 2 days? Soren bowed his head slightly to Pastor Phil and was about to leave with Vivian. Wait. The priestess stopped him and quickly said, Vivian has some talents that normal people don't have. Maybe she has the potential to become a priestess. I think you should leave her here first. If she can become a priestess, it'll be good for her future. At least it's better than. At this point, the priestess stopped talking. What she meant was, of course, that it was better than following Sauron around the streets. Becoming a priestess of a god was equivalent to having a noble identity, and her status would also skyrocket. In her opinion, it was better than following Sauron around in a third-rate gang in the slums. Of course, she didn't know about Soren's massacre in the slums. Vivian wouldn't tell anyone about it. In the priestess' eyes, Soren was still a cheat in a certain guild. No matter how good a thief's skills were, in the end they were still useless. Surprisingly, Soren wasn't the first to speak up. Vivian's expression was ugly. She glared at the priestess and said, I don't want to be a priestess. Staying by my brother's side is the best. She would never allow anyone to look down on her brother. What's wrong with being a thief? If Soren hadn't risked his life to steal her things, she wouldn't have survived until now. These lofty and despicable people. Who knew how difficult it was for a teenager to raise a 3-year-old girl? Her brother used to carry bags at the docks for a period of time, but no matter how hard he worked, the money he earned was still not enough to fill their stomachs. In Vivian's heart, her brother was the one who held up her world. She would never allow anyone to look down on her brother or speak ill of him, even if it was her sister, the priest, who she had always been close to. The little girl glared at her fiercely as if the other party was her enemy. The priestess was stunned. She had never seen the little girl lose her temper, especially with her. She wanted to apologize, but she still stubbornly believed that Soren couldn't give her a better future. He was a thief from the slums. In the future he would at most become the leader of a gang, but his life would still be precarious. Vivian deserved a better future. The priestess insisted that she was doing this for Vivian's sake, so her expression was stubborn. She turned her head and stared at Soren, as if she wanted him to realize that Vivian would only have a better future if she stayed in the church. Unfortunately, she was disappointed. Soren only smiled and gently stroked Vivian's head, as if he was comforting an angry kitten. He smiled and lifted Vivian's small body, then placed her on his shoulder. The little girl giggled and wrapped her arms around Soren's neck, rubbing her forehead against his hair. She was always so happy. If no one purposely made her angry, this quiet little girl could happily busy herself for a day. She cleaned the house, washed the clothes, packed the things. Although the clothes were always dirty, Soren didn't mind. I'm sorry. Soren held the little girl's waist with one hand. She was a little malnourished, so she was light as a feather. He slowly shook his head and said seriously, Vivian won't become a priestess. A priestess? The time of troubles was about to begin. The Dawn Lord was one of the first gods to fall. When that time came, the priestess in front of him would lose her ability to cast divine spells. Unless her wisdom exceeded 20, she would be able to reanalyze divine spells with her own ability, then she would be able to give her faith to the origin of order, and use her faith as the core to understand the world. Otherwise, she would be an ordinary person in the future. At most, she would have a few more combat skills than ordinary people. Soren had already decided to leave. He wanted to leave the chaos caused by the skinning incident. How could he allow Vivian to stay in the Dawn Lord shrine and become a priestess for a god that was about to fall? Let's go. Soren bowed slightly again to express his gratitude for her care, then left with the little girl on his shoulder. No matter what, the other party had good intentions. However, for Soren, leaving with Vivian and finding a safe place to steadily improve his strength was the best choice. The priestess watched the two leave. She opened her mouth to say something, but in the end she couldn't say anything. She only looked a little disappointed and envious. They depended on each other. That was the thought that popped up in her mind. Perhaps for Vivian, there was nothing happier than staying by Soren's side. The priestess looked at the little girl's happy face as she left, then looked at the empty shrine behind her and muttered, I hope you can take good care of her. She sighed softly and walked toward the main hall. The evil skinning people were getting more and more brazen, and the 3 shrines of Amber City had decided to join forces to deal with them. There was going to be a huge battle soon. Perhaps it would be better for her to stay by Soren's side since she was going to join the battle. Leaving Amber City was not as simple as closing one's eyes. Not to mention the possibility of losing one's way, accidents along the way could cost one's life. For a person to wander alone in the wilderness, he was either courageous because of his skills, or courting death. There was no second possibility. Soren still had a lot of things to prepare. For example, he needed to find a merchant group and pay them a sum of money to follow them. For example, he needed to recall his old fighting skills and try to practice his basic sword skills. After that, he needed to master sword form, heavy hack. He needed to prepare emergency medicine, enough food, camping equipment, and even a mount for Vivian. Monsters weren't the only dangerous things in the wilderness. There were also poisonous insects, beasts, and bandits. If he didn't know how big of a mess the skinning incident had caused, he wouldn't have left. He really didn't want to take Vivian on a long journey. However, he had to leave now because according to his estimation, the skinning incident would escalate to another level in half a month. The first child of God would appear in front of the world. It was the Witch of Fear, Lillian. The Dreadlord of the Abyss, who possessed great divine power, foresaw his fall, so he left his descendants in the mortal world and distributed his divine power to them. There were demons in the Abyss who did the same. They left their most primordial divinity as a seed in one of their descendants. After that, they planned to use the divinity to devour the soul of their descendant and finally use the divine power inherited by their descendant to be resurrected. Some succeeded and some failed. Some demons' resurrection plans were ruined and eventually died in the mortal world. However, some demons' resurrection plans were successful. They were resurrected in the broken bodies of their descendants and restored their divine power. It was not a possession. Instead, they directly destroyed their descendants and used their divine power to create a new body for resurrection. It was cruel. However, this was the law of the Abyss. If Soren remembered correctly, there were at least 2 children of God at that time. These were the descendants of the demons with great power. They were the ones who caused the initial turmoil. The descendants of the Dreadlord killed each other and spread fear in the mortal world. The skinning incident was an opportunity, an ancient and evil sacrificial ritual. In the end, the Witch of Fear, Lillian, became one of the most powerful children of God. Then, when the time of troubles began, she was killed by the Lady of Silver Moon, goddess of the moon, who had lost her divine power and descended to the mortal world as a saint. This was not the end. It was just the beginning of a more chaotic era because the gods would descend to the mortal world as saints. Chapter 25. Under the dim candlelight. Soren and Vivian sat opposite each other at a small table. In front of them were white bread, bacon, fish soup, and lettuce. In this era, human food was still relatively simple and barren. In fact, with the historical background of Westerners, the food itself was very uncreative. The real culinary skills were in the Elven Kingdom and the small halflings, especially the latter who were almost master level in cooking. But for Vivian, the food in front of her was a little too sumptuous. Brother. The little girl swallowed her saliva and blinked. Isn't it too wasteful? There was meat, soup, and white bread. In the past, they could only eat such good food during the new year. Soren didn't answer. He just reached out and touched her little head lovingly. Then, with a twist of his fingertips, a shiny kindler appeared on the back of his hand. Under the dim candlelight, the gold dirils shone brightly, causing Vivian's beautiful little face to show a trace of surprise. Then she smiled until her eyes narrowed like crescent moons and whispered, "Big brother. Are we rich?" She didn't care where the money came from. Since it was in their hands, the money belonged to them. Sauron was amused by the way the little girl spoke in a low voice. He reached out and pinched Vivian's cheeks. Then he took out an embroidered pouch and shook it gently with his fingers. There was a crisp sound coming from the pouch. He smiled and said, "This is for you. Vivian's share of the profits." The little girl didn't understand what Soren meant, but it didn't prevent her from knowing that it was for her. She reached out her small hand and took the pouch. It was sewn with a simple pattern cloth. Only the noble ladies in the city would use such a pouch. There was a circle of string on it that could be tied up by pulling it tight. Vivian opened the pouch and was immediately dazzled by the light inside. She saw several kindler and many silver dirils. "We're rich." The little girl smiled until her eyes narrowed. She happily put away the pouch and said with a sweet smile, "Thank you, big brother." This is kindler. She had never had so much money before. It was enough for her to buy a lot of food and a new dress. "Let's eat." Soren rubbed her head and placed a piece of meat into her bowl. In the beginning he was not used to the lack of chopsticks, but as he stayed in this world for a long time, he gradually became indifferent to it. Adventurers were not so particular when they were in the wild. Most of the time they would just eat with their hands. The little girl happily took a bite, and her face showed a trace of satisfaction. Then she scooped up some fish soup with a spoon, blew on it, and handed it to Soren. She blinked and said, "Big brother." Open your mouth. Soren smiled helplessly and opened his mouth. Vivian giggled and suddenly drank the soup herself. She even pretended to smack her lips and said, "It's delicious." Naughty girl. Soren did not know whether to laugh or cry, but he was inexplicably happy in his heart. He had not been this happy in a long time. It was a quiet day. The turbulent situation in Amber City did not affect the two's good mood. Soren woke up early in the morning to practice his swordsmanship. Basic swordsmanship could be perfectly applied to any weapon because its core was to hack, slash, and stab. The memory of the battle was still there, and Soren remembered it very clearly. He practiced according to the routine in his memory, familiarizing himself with the weapon in his hand and familiarizing himself with his own body. Sword form, heavy hack. This was a very practical combat skill. The key to it was to concentrate all the strength of the whole body into a single hack. For example, if you threw a punch. If you only used the strength of your arm, it would be obvious that you did not pass the test. The strength you used would not even be 1/3 of your full strength, and it would not be fatal if you hit your opponent. However, if you could use the strength of your waist, then congratulations, you have mastered the most basic combat skills. The strength of your punch would be enough to severely injure your opponent. However, if you could use all the strength in your body to explode with a single punch, then you would be considered to have mastered a combat skill that could be fatal. Sword form, heavy hack, was such a combat skill. You have to concentrate all your strength in a single slash in order to achieve the maximum speed and lethality that you can unleash in a single slash. Only then would you be considered to have mastered the skill. Sword form, heavy hack, was a combat skill that could be applied to all weapons. When used, it could maximize the user's strength. Even an ordinary person with 10 points of strength could split a 20 centimeter thick piece of wood with a single hack after mastering the skill. This was because concentrating all the strength in your body into a single line would increase your combat power by several times. According to the statistics. That is, when using this type of combat skill, you can unleash the maximum amount of damage you can deal. It was a bit similar to the aura slash that a warrior could master after advancing to the next level. However, sword form, heavy hack, was a one-time attack, while the aura slash could be used to stimulate the blood of the human body through a special method for around 30 seconds. If you could advance to a sword saint, you would be able to unleash twice the lethality at the cost of overloading your body and getting injured. This was what many people were afraid of in the past. A fatal attack that did not need to hit the vitals. However, the advancement of a sword saint had a special requirement. The way they unleashed their power meant that they could not wear any kind of armor. Otherwise, the burden on their body would cause their speed and lethality to greatly decrease. For example, Soren never wore anything above leather armor because it would cause his agility to decrease and his ability to dodge. It could be said that rogues relied on their agility to dodge. If you wanted to wear armor, you had to wear heavy armor. You had to give up your agility in order to pursue a strong defense. Time passed little by little. Soren trained for half a day and then began to read a book. That's right. Those books that he found in the treasure cave. Although he could recognize the words in them, he had to memorize them again. Perhaps it was because of his eidetic memory ability, Soren memorized them very quickly. While he was trying to memorize one of the books about basic spell knowledge and information related to the Magus region, he suddenly remembered something. A row of data appeared, reading completed. You have successfully read and memorized a book. Literacy +1, spell identification +1. There were no basic professions for scholars. Soren could only improve his literacy by reading books. Because these books recorded the knowledge of wizards, Soren also improved his spell identification skill. In simple terms, it was the familiarity of various spells. For example, when an enemy used a spell, you could judge it based on the opponent's voice and hand gestures. Then you could prepare to dodge in advance. Or some special magical devices, as well as various enchanted extraordinary items and so on, you can recognize them through the knowledge of spell identification. In a battle, no one would yell out what skill they were going to use. Whether or not you could predict the enemy's spell attack depended entirely on your skill points and spell identification. This skill was not useful against warriors. But if you were to fight against wizards, it was a life-saving skill that must be mastered. Soren relied on this skill several times to predict the spells cast by wizards in advance and then avoided the range of the spells. For example, if you knew that the opponent was going to cast a fireball spell and rolled to dodge in advance, you would only take half of the damage. But if you didn't know, if you were in the explosion range of the fireball spell, you would be instantly turned into a Spartan, SBD. If your spell identification skill was high enough, You could even judge the enemy's silent and instant spells by the fluctuation of arcane energy around you. If you wanted to avoid instant spells, spell identification was a skill that must be mastered. At noon, Soren brought Vivian into Amber City. He wanted to go to the business district to buy some daily necessities, including camping tools and small things that might be useful. Of course, the cute little girl also needed a new set of clothes. Because they were going to travel in the wilderness, those beautiful but impractical clothes had to be abandoned. Soren's first priority was to buy clothes that were sturdy, durable, and had a certain degree of protection. The lowest requirement was that they would not be damaged by the barbs on the trees and flowers in the wilderness. Therefore, skirts had to be abandoned and he could only buy some sturdy clothes. Then there were shoes. This was one of the most important things for an adventure in the wilderness. First, it had to be durable, second and most importantly it had to be warm. Soren did not hesitate to spend 3 kindlers to buy a pair of high-quality moccasins. So much so that Vivian even complained a little. After the little girl received the new pair of boots, although she said that it was too wasteful and expensive, and that she should just buy a pair of ordinary thick cloth shoes, her eyes were already narrowed into 2 lines. She was full of smiles for the whole day. They were really exquisite and beautiful boots. Probably only the noble ladies in the city could afford to wear them. They were just a little too big even if they were the smallest size. But it's okay. I'll grow up soon and by then it'll be just right. Now I can buy some things first. The little girl thought about trivial things in her mind, and the corners of her mouth unconsciously curled into a smile. Her beautiful big eyes also narrowed into a smile. I have new clothes and boots. Okay. And a new hairband, pink. It's very pretty. I'm so happy today. And so, Vivian's happy day passed just like that. She did not care much about leaving Amber City because the little girl's concept of home was very vague. Moreover, in her heart, only the place where her brother was counted as her home. Therefore her home was very simple. Wherever her home went she would go. Chapter 26. In the evening, Soren brought Vivian back to the shack in the slums. He bought a lot of things. After all, the journey could take up to a month. They had to travel from Amber City to Whiterun City, then take a detour from Whiterun City to Autumn Leaf City to avoid the Gnolls' territory. Autumn Leaf City was where the half-elves lived, but it was still 5 days away from the Forest of Dreams. Traveling in this era was very troublesome. It took Soren half a day to find a caravan heading to Whiterun, and he paid 5 kindler coins to go with them. The Agate River ran from the north to the south, and Amber City was developed because of it. However, transportation by land and water was only one of the channels. There were more goods that needed to be transported by caravans. It was normal to look for a caravan when traveling in the wilderness because most caravans had their own hired guards. They might be hired by a merchant, or several merchants pooled their money to hire them. If other people wanted to travel with them, they would have to pay a certain price based on the distance of the journey. In return, the caravan would protect and provide help along the way. Most of the caravan guards were warriors with clean backgrounds. Some of them even formed groups under the Adventurers Guild. It was a bit like an escort agency, a business that relied heavily on reputation. After all, traveling in the wilderness was too risky, and one's life depended on it. Any accident could lead to failure. Therefore, not just any adventurer could become a caravan guard. Trust, this was very, very important. Under the dim candlelight, Vivian was tidying up her small pouch. There were a lot of miscellaneous items in it, including needles and threads. If one did not have a full set of rare-grade equipment, they would come in handy one day. Soren was also tidying up his things. The 3-foot-long multi-dimensional pouch was not small at all. It had almost a cubic meter of space, but it was not big enough to hold all the items. Just a few sets of clothes, some dry food, and camping equipment were enough to fill up half of the pouch's space. Soren did not even dare to dream of having a 10-foot-long multi-dimensional pouch. Although the pouch's space was only 3 times larger, its price had increased by more than 30 times. A 10-foot-long multi-dimensional bag was used as a small storage unit. The little girl carefully organized her things. Her beautiful and exquisite moccasins were placed by the bedside. Every time she looked at them, she couldn't help but reveal a happy smile. Although Soren told her to wear it now, Vivian insisted on wearing it on the day of departure. The road conditions in the slums were too harsh. If he wasn't careful, he might step on feces and mud. Even the wilderness outside was better than here. The little girl didn't have many things. Soon she was done. She tilted her head and looked at Soren with a sweet smile on her face. Looking at the multidimensional bag, she still felt a sense of novelty. There were so many things in this world that she didn't know about. Brother said that he would bring her to the Elven Kingdom. Were the elves there really as beautiful as the legend said? I really want to see them sooner. The young girl did not realize the tiredness and danger of the journey at all. She was only satisfying her curiosity and imagination. After all, she was only 8 years old. Soren fastened a leggings and a belt buckle on his waist. He tested to see if they fit. Then he took out a sharp throwing knife and carefully inserted them into the leggings. There was a small pouch on top of each dagger. It was natural to be well prepared when adventuring in the wilderness. Since he had a scimitar, he couldn't carry a bow or crossbow with him. Therefore, it was necessary to carry a few throwing knives with him. The damage of a 1d3 could also be life-saving. Rogues were good at crafting weapons. Soren modified the crossbow's firing mechanism. He removed the shell and the continuous firing mechanism and turned it into a single-shot sleeve crossbow. This way it was small enough to be carried in clothes. Although its damage would be greatly reduced, it was good for stealth and could be used for sneak attacks. Open and aboveboard? Rogues were definitely not fated to use such things. Swoosh. Soren grabbed the throwing knife and threw it out. It hit the door frame in an instant. He calculated his accuracy and strength and said to himself, "With my current strength I can only shoot at 10 meters at most. It's barely enough for a battle in the wilderness." The two of them actually had a lot of things to bring. In addition to the multi-dimensional bag that was full, Soren also prepared a package. The caravan would leave the day after tomorrow, so he had to take Vivian to buy a mount tomorrow. A warhorse was definitely out of the question. Even if he bought one, he wouldn't be able to afford it. He could prepare a workhorse, which cost about 10 Kindler coins. Many people naively thought that horses ate grass, but in fact, most horses ate grain. Even the inferior workhorses needed to be fed with beans and wheat bran mixed with grass regularly. Otherwise, they wouldn't have enough strength. If it was a superior warhorse, it would eat beans and wheat as its staple food. It would also be mixed with eggs and other food regularly. Wild horses eat most of the time. Stupa. Otherwise, how could it bear the charge of a heavy knight? If it was a special mount, it would need to be fed with meat, which would cost more than 10 silver dirhams a day. Let's sleep. Soren pulled out the throwing knife, then took off his equipment and said softly, "We'll buy something tomorrow. We're leaving the day after tomorrow. It might be a tough journey. You need to rest now." Vivian nodded obediently. Then her petite body shrank inwards as she whispered, "Big brother. There's something I haven't told you yet." Soren smiled and rubbed her little head. He lay flat on the bed to organize his thoughts and asked casually, "What is it?" "Is this?" The little girl got up and her cute little face was quite serious. She said seriously, "Look. You." She uttered a strange syllable, and then a bright light suddenly burst out from her fingertips. In an instant, Soren was in trouble. 1 second ago, Soren heard the little girl's words and turned his head. Then, a bright light suddenly burst out and blinded his eyes. It could be said that everything in front of him was completely white. It was as if he had been hit by a flash bomb. Flash. Soren closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. After a while, he recovered and said with a face full of disbelief, "How did you suddenly know how to cast spells?" "No. This should be light." Flash was an enhanced version of light. When casting a spell, there was an extra syllable. Soren still had his memories of the past, so he knew a lot about low-level cantrips. Very quickly, he overturned his previous judgment. But this was not important. The important thing was, how did Vivian suddenly know how to cast spells? Even if it was the lowest level of cantrips, it would take a long time to memorize and understand them. She had only been separated from him for 2 days. How could she master spells in such a short time? The little girl's expression was also very blank. After hearing his question, she replied, "I'm not too sure either. That day I saw Sister Annalyn use it once, so I was curious and tried it out. I didn't expect to succeed so quickly." Divine spell? Extraordinary perception. Soren's face showed a hint of shock. Then his expression became more serious than ever. He said seriously, "You really only saw it once?" "Yes." Vivian nodded slightly and asked doubtfully, "Is this spell very difficult to learn?" It was more than difficult. If one did not have enough talent, many people would not be able to learn spells in their lifetime. Could it be that Vivian had 20 points of perception? Otherwise, how could she learn a level 0 divine spell in such a short time? After all, she had never been baptized, nor did she believe in any god. "Sit down." Soren sat up with a serious expression. Then he asked Vivian to sit up straight as well. He stretched out his hand and waved it in front of the little girl's eyes. Then, with a flip of his hand, a kindler appeared between his fingers and disappeared with a flick of his finger. Soren's fingers moved rapidly. A kindler would appear and disappear at the same time. Sometimes it would be one, sometimes it would be two. In the end, he clenched his fist and placed it in front of Vivian's eyes. He said in a deep voice, "How many kindler do I have? 20 points of extraordinary agility." Soren's reflexes were far beyond the range of a normal person's. The speed and agility of his fingers were also beyond the limits of what the naked eye could capture. You could guess what he was doing, but it was very difficult to see clearly. Normal people could move their fingers back and forth and create afterimages. If they bent their fingers in the process, it would be very difficult for the naked eye to catch them. Not to mention, Soren was a top rogue with 20 points of extraordinary agility. Vivian showed a troubled expression and bitterly said, "Big brother, I didn't see clearly. Why don't you give me a hint?" Soren's expression froze. He glared at her and said in a serious tone, "Just guess. Just use your intuition." The little girl nodded as if she understood. She tilted her head and thought for a moment before saying, "I see. Then I guess there are two." Soren frowned and slowly opened his hand. There were 3 kindler in it. Oh. Vivian was disappointed. "You guessed wrong. It wasn't intuition. If one was born with 20 points of intuition, they would automatically acquire a talent called sixth sense. This was a very powerful ability. It could even be said to be one of the top talents. Let alone guessing the number of coins, even if an enemy wanted to launch a sneak attack, they would be able to use their intuition to figure it out. Then, if it wasn't intuition, then there was only one answer. P.S. I suddenly feel like I'm watching Conan. Chapter 27. Extraordinary Charm. Soren stared at the little girl in front of him and said in disbelief, "Is Vivian a natural warlock?" Warlocks. Tall, rich and handsome mages. They didn't need to learn any knowledge, and with time, they would automatically master the relevant spells. They didn't need any spell slots, and they didn't need to rely on the weave to cast spells, because their ability to cast spells was their innate talent. It was as simple as eating and drinking. As long as they had the potential to become a warlock, they would automatically learn all kinds of spells when the time came. They didn't need to understand the structure of the spells, and they could cast all kinds of spells by instinct. Wizards, priests, warlocks. These were the 3 representative professions of mages. The attribute that governed a wizard's casting ability was intelligence. The attribute that affected a priest's casting ability was perception, and the attribute that determined a warlock's ability to comprehend spells was charm. These 3 attributes were actually very difficult to describe in a few words. So, let me think about it first and then I'll explain it to you in a simpler way. First was intelligence. It represented memory and comprehension. Casting spells required the memorization of complex models. This model was a bit like the modern circuit board. There were many semiconductors, spell nodes, and circuit structures, spell circuits, on it, so if you want to cast spells successfully, you need a strong memory and comprehension ability like a calculator. To use a modern analogy, the wizards had to train their brains to become the lowest level biological computer, which could calculate a large number of spell models in an instant. This required the development of the right side of the brain. So most wizards had a good memory, and their comprehension ability was also very strong, not EQ. They were like the top students among the top students, who could deduce the structure of an atomic bomb in their brain. In fact, these kinds of people weren't necessarily good at dealing with people and other aspects. This was the intelligence that determined a wizard's strength. Next was perception. This was easy to understand. It represented a person's willpower, judgment, perception, and intuition. Generally, people with strong perception had a hidden sixth sense, which could predict things in the dark. They also had a strong perception of their surroundings, and could perceive many subtle changes, and could even perceive some hidden existences and powers. So Soren tested Vivian's sixth sense. Finally, there was charm. This was the most difficult thing to explain. It could be understood as 3 parts: appearance, charisma, and affinity. They needed to stop here. Because he couldn't explain it clearly in a few words, he needed to organize his sentences. First of all, appearance. Most people with extraordinary appearances had decent charm, 12 points and above. This was because most intelligent creatures pursued beauty, which meant that the appearance association was still very powerful. The second was personality charm, which was a person's inner charm. For example, many people who did not look handsome or beautiful often had a very strong personality charm. Among them, the most representative was a person with a high level of personality charm, 18 points and above. The following paragraph describes the real-life effects of charisma. On the 26th of February 1815, Napoleon returned to France from Elba, and the restored House of Bourbon sent its troops. Napoleon went up to meet them alone, waved his hand and said, "I am back." Then the soldiers shouted, "Welcome, His Majesty the Emperor." And so they changed sides. Lastly, there was affinity. This was the most important branch of the charisma attribute. Usually, people with high charisma had strong affinity. If there was no subjective rejection, they could easily make others feel good about them. This kind of affinity was divided into many aspects, and the target it was inclined to was different according to one's own characteristics. For example, the affinity to people, bards, the affinity to animals, druids, and the most important affinity to elemental energy, warlocks. Even affinity to the laws of the universe, fate warlocks, divine warlocks. So, mages could be described with these three metaphors, which were generally regarded as the elemental energy of the evocation system. First of all, wizards relied on their intelligence to search for elemental energy and analyze it through complex calculations. They understood the nature of elemental energy, when it was active, when it was inert, what changes would occur when different elemental energies collided, what changes would occur when the same elemental energies were combined, what kind of magic circuits needed to control them, and how many magic nodes, conductors, needed to be set up to make them explode. This was the core point of wizards relying on their intelligence to cast spells. Next, priests, relied on their perception to find elemental energy, and then used the power of faith, spiritual energy, to influence them. Finally, with the power of the gods, nature and laws, they controlled them to complete the casting of spells. So priests gave their faith to the gods, Droll gave their faith to nature, and some special professions gave their faith to the laws of the world. Elemental energy was only a part of the structure of priest spells. The core energy of priest spells was still divine power, so it was called divine spells. Finally, there were warlocks. This was very simple. Because they didn't have to do anything, they just had to wait for elemental energy to gather on their own, and then awaken the ability to cast spells. If wizards caught elemental energy to control it, then priests found elemental energy to influence it. As for warlocks, they waited for elemental energy to take the initiative to approach them. That was why there was a saying, warlocks were the tall, rich, and handsome mages. However, it was obvious that they couldn't reach the highest level by relying on talent alone. Therefore, the number of spells mastered by warlocks was far less than that of wizards. At the same time, the speed of learning new spells was also very slow because most warlocks didn't have high intelligence. Their memory and comprehension ability were average. Wizards needed 3 to 5 months to master low-level spells, while warlocks might even need 30 to 50 years to master one. A typical example would be the kobold warlocks. These creatures naturally had more than 16 points of charm, but their intelligence was only around 10 points. Basically, whatever spells they learned when leveling up as a warlock, they would only be able to cast the same spells in their lifetime. Only warlocks with intelligence of more than 18 points and the potential to become wizards could expand their number of spells through learning. If the goddess of magic had fallen, then the requirement would be increased to more than 20 points of intelligence. Not enough intelligence. It was better to just rely on talent to cast spells. Because no matter how much you learned, you wouldn't be able to remember those complicated spell circuits and spell nodes, and you would never be able to construct new spell models subjectively. The higher the level of the spell, the more this was the case. Was she really a warlock? The more Soren thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. The little girl seemed to have a natural affinity with people, and she was also very cute. Her charm was definitely not lower than 16 points. If Vivian was really a natural warlock, then she didn't need to understand spells at all. She just needed to follow her instincts and use her talent to cast spells. That was why there were cases of people learning Illuminate just by looking at a priest casting a spell. Because all level 0 spells were universal. Soren closed his eyes and thought for a moment, then he said seriously, "Vivian, repeat after me." Yeah. GF. Relying on his strong memory, Soren said some strange half-syllables. If it was a normal person, it would be very difficult to say these half-syllables, but he succeeded. Of course. But nothing happened. But when Vivian followed Soren to say these strange half-syllables, a weak electric arc suddenly appeared in her palm. Soren's body suddenly stiffened, and then his hair stood on end. Lightning shock, level 0 spell. Soren's hair stood on end. He quickly stopped Vivian in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Let go of your feelings. Try to use your mind to control the energy you feel. You don't need to understand it. You just need to learn how to make it listen to you." Crackle. Vivian nodded as if she understood. She tried again very seriously, and then a weak electric arc appeared in her palm again. It jumped a few times before gradually disappearing. It worked. Soren's face showed a hint of joy. He happily hugged the little girl and kissed her. Vivian is really a warlock. In the future, she will definitely be a rich and beautiful mage. The little girl didn't understand Soren at all, but this didn't prevent her from showing a happy smile. Because she finally had the ability to help her brother. Warlocks. With the awakening of their innate ability, they only needed a key to cast level 0 spells, and this key was the spell of the spell. In the future, as their profession level increased, they would automatically comprehend and master higher level spells. Depending on the aspect of affinity, warlocks would automatically comprehend the relevant spells and automatically master the spell of the spell. There was no need to analyze the structure of those spells, because their ability to cast spells was itself a kind of talent. Finally, the brain of living creatures had hereditary memory and hereditary talent. This ability was once considered by many players as the source of the warlock's power. While having extraordinary affinity, the energy of nature would also awaken the hereditary memory they had, and automatically awaken the relevant spell memory when their ability improved. So, many people thought that warlocks were the descendants of some powerful beings in the mythological era. Among them, the representative was the dragon disciple. P.S. This chapter is a bit boring, but it's a very important thing. Chapter 28. A dragon disciple was a typical example of a warlock. Over time, they would automatically awaken their dragon-related innate abilities, as well as many related spells. Finally, they would strengthen their dragon-related bloodline and replace their original human bloodline, eventually becoming a more powerful half-dragon. Therefore, the dragons were often regarded as the source of the sorcerer's inheritance because they didn't need to learn anything. From birth, a lot of knowledge and memories were stored in their minds. As long as their strength increased, they would gradually awaken all kinds of memory spells and related knowledge from when they were young. This was a very powerful point. The genetic characteristics of dragons had always been a secret that many wizards wanted to study because if they succeeded, they could also use it to cultivate their descendants, allowing their descendants to awaken related hereditary memories over time. Soren even received a similar quest in the north. The target of the quest was an adult white dragon. Now that it was confirmed that Vivian had the talent of a warlock, a new question arose. How much is her innate charm? Normally, a warlock's innate talent would be stronger the earlier they awakened. Under normal circumstances, they would only awaken around puberty, 13 years old. Such a warlock would usually have around 16 points of charm. Basically, it was very difficult to find a warlock with less than 15 points of charm. When a warlock awakened their innate talent, it meant that their own affinity had begun to affect the surrounding energy. Following some special events, their emotions would fluctuate greatly, and they would awaken their first level 0 spell. At the same time, they would also have the ability to control external energy. It was more complicated. Just like a newborn dragon in the dragon clan, it had to wait until it grew into a young dragon, 30 to 50 years old, before it could awaken its innate talent and master its first draconic spell. It was the same for a warlock. They could only awaken their first level 0 spell when they were young. Therefore, every time this happened, it meant that the warlock's innate talent was higher. The rough conversion was that for every year of awakening, the base charm would increase by 1 point. In other words, if a 13-year-old awakened sorcerer had 16 points of charm, a 12-year-old awakened sorcerer would have 17 points of charm and an 11-year-old awakened sorcerer would have 18 points of charm. Vivian was now 8 years old. Her innate talent should be around 20 to 21 points of charm. How is this possible? Soren was shocked beyond words. He murmured, "Doesn't that mean he's a natural-born divine warlock? It's even possible for me to become a heavenly fate warlock in the future." How much was it? Soren had a troubled look on his face, as if he was troubled by the fact that he couldn't determine Vivian's attributes. Attributes were a very important factor in a person's strength. Only when one's attributes were high enough would they be able to gain more power when leveling up their profession. Therefore, in many cases, the starting point would affect the ending point. Before possessing a demigod divinity or mastering divinity, +1 to all attributes, A professional's strength after entering the realm of legends was largely determined by their basic attributes in the early stages. Because at that time, one of your attributes must reach 25 points, and if possible your second attribute must also reach 25 points. Damn it. Why don't you have the scouting ability you used to have? Soren rubbed his head in distress. In the past, players all had the scouting ability, which allowed them to check other people's attributes. Although it was based on the level of the skill, it was enough for him to determine Vivian's innate attributes. But now, it seemed that there was no one else in the world who had attributes other than him, so naturally, there was no possibility of scouting. However, at this moment, a row of data suddenly appeared. Scouting ability activated. Do you want to perform data analysis on target? Pay 300 soul energy, slaughter EXP. You can perform data analysis on target's basic attributes. More data analysis will consume more soul energy. 300 slaughter EXP? Wasn't this price a bit too high? But after looking at Vivian's confused expression, Soren gritted his teeth and chose to pay. It was only 300 slaughter EXP. At most he could earn it back by killing a few gnolls. But he still had to figure out Vivian's innate attributes, because she might have an even more amazing talent than Soren. Soren was born with 18 dexterity, plus 1 acquired training ability, 17 intelligence, plus 1 acquired training ability. Begin data analysis. Soren's vision suddenly turned black, and a pain appeared in his head. Then, numerous zeros and ones began to jump in his mind. This feeling was like lying in bed for more than half a month, and when he woke up, there were countless streams of data, and he couldn't move his body at all. Even the slightest movement would cause a strong surge of electricity to rush through his body. A row of data appeared. Data analysis successful. Consumed 300 soul energy. Target's data is as follows. Name Vivian. Race human. Age 8 years old. Attributes: Strength 5, Dexterity 9, Vitality 6, Intelligence 16, Wisdom 18, Charm 21. Others: unknown. Target is still a child. Main attributes: Strength, Vitality, Dexterity, will increase greatly as time passes. Secondary attributes: Wisdom, Charm, will increase slightly as time passes. Basic attributes will stop increasing after reaching adulthood. 21 Charm. It was even higher than Soren's expectation of 20 Charm. At the same time, Vivian also had 18 Wisdom. No wonder the priestess of the Dawn Lord said that she had an extraordinary talent, and that she could become a priestess. Wasn't that nonsense? With 18 Wisdom, becoming a priestess would be as easy as eating and drinking. Big brother? The little girl seemed to have noticed the pain on Soren's face. She immediately grabbed his hand and asked anxiously, "What's wrong? Are you feeling uncomfortable again?" The streams of data in front of Soren's eyes gradually disappeared. Maybe it was because he had seen too many zeros and ones, but now he was more or less used to it. He smiled and patted Vivian's head. "I'm fine. But my Vivian will become a legend when she grows up. She might even become a beauty that can cause the downfall of a city." He had 21 points of natural charm, 18 perceptive sense, 16 points of innate intelligence. These were only the attributes of a child. According to Soren's past experience, after reaching adulthood, the main attribute would increase by more than 5 points, and the secondary attribute would increase by 1 to 3 points. In other words, even if Vivian didn't do anything, she could easily become a spellcaster in the future. At the same time, she would have an extraordinary talent. No matter what spellcaster, as long as she was willing, whether it was a wizard, a priest, a warlock, a droll, or a shaman, she could become a spellcaster. Her talent was so much better than Soren's. The little girl still didn't fully understand Soren's words, but it didn't stop her from smiling happily. "Big brother, are you saying that I'm beautiful?" At the same time, in a hidden underground chamber in Amber City, the blue flame on the altar suddenly flickered, and then a dark figure appeared in the middle of the altar. His figure seemed to have swallowed the light. Although the flame shone on his body, nothing could be seen. It was just a pure shadow of darkness. "Your Excellency." The fallen followers guarding the altar knelt down on one knee. The red-robed priest bowed and said, "Why have you come in person? Has the Lord given a new oracle?" The dark figure on the altar wasn't a physical body. It looked more like a projection of some kind of energy. He looked down coldly and said in a deep voice, "The first Son of God has awakened. There was an accident in the prophecy. The Lord's will did not descend upon the Son of God. The first son of God awakened his own divine power. Pass down my orders. Find him at all costs. Awaken the sleeping knights of terror. Send them out. Crush all the ants that stand in our way. I want to see the first son of God return to his original path and wake up completely in despair and fear. The dark figure gradually disappeared. The red-robed priest's face showed a hint of madness. He licked his lips and looked at the 8 marble coffins around the altar. There were countless complicated patterns engraved on them, like a powerful seal. He glanced at the bottom of the altar with a cruel gaze and grinned. Now, go and find enough sacrifices. The ritual to awaken the Knights of Terror will be held at midnight tomorrow. This city would be destroyed before the dawn arrived. Fear will be everywhere. Chapter 29. The night passed quickly. When Soren woke up and was about to bring Vivian to buy a mount, he noticed that there were many more guards in Amber City than before. Even the 9th Division, which had been stationed near the Black Boar Forest, had been called back. This was the best division in Amber City. There were 126 of them in total, and most of them were warriors with professions above level 8. There were also a few rangers, priests, and barbarians. They were all middle-grade professions, and any one of them could easily wipe out a guild. Among Amber City's 1,200-strong standing army, they were one of the best elite troops in the city. What's going on? Soren picked up Vivian and looked at the panicked crowd. He frowned and asked, "Did something happen again?" At that moment, a dark-skinned young man suddenly shouted from afar. "Hey!" He quickly pushed through the crowd and ran to Soren, panting, "I finally found you. Luckily, I heard that you wanted to buy a mount yesterday, so I waited at the mule market. Otherwise you would have missed it. Don't ask. Follow me. I'll tell you more on the way." The young man in front of Soren looked familiar. He remembered that he was one of the people he met in the caravan when he was looking for the Whiterun caravan. He seemed to be the servant of the owner of the caravan. Why was he waiting for him here? Weren't they supposed to leave tomorrow? Did they change their mind? What's going on? Soren thought for a while and asked, "Why are you waiting for us here?" "The owner is leaving." The dark-skinned young man pushed through the crowd and quickly said, "The owner said he was leaving early this morning, and the manager was sent to sell the goods. The owner still remembered the promise, so he sent me here early in the morning. The caravan is leaving at noon today." "Let's go. It's over there." The tanned young man led Soren through several turns and soon arrived at the north gate of Amber City. There were already a lot of people gathered there, and there were also dozens of large carriages parked around. A group of fully armed guards were scattered around. They had been following the caravan for more than 3 months, and they were all from the merchants' hometowns. This was a typical caravan from the north, but there was something special about it. Their leader was a woman from Tanara. Descendants of witches. Soren could hear the complaints of some of the merchants in the north. They were basically saying that they didn't earn the money they were supposed to earn by selling their goods in such a hurry. They might even lose a lot of money. However, although these merchants said so, they still ordered their workers to move the goods down. The northern witches had a very high reputation. In the eyes of the Northlanders, they were incomparably noble. Not only were they powerful and mysterious, but they also had the ability to predict the future. "It's here." The dark-skinned young man stopped and took a deep breath. "The caravan will set off at noon today. I'll bring you here to see the place. There's still half a day before we leave. If you want to come with us, you should go and prepare your things now. If you want to wait until tomorrow, my master said that you can go to Butler Foddery. He will refund you the deposit. Leave now." Soren couldn't help but frown. He thought to himself, could it be that the witches also foresaw that the skinning incident would escalate? But why the hurry? It's only a day's time. Could it be that there's going to be a major change within a day? Let's not think too much about it. It's better to be safe than sorry. So what if it's a day earlier? Soren immediately nodded and carried Vivian's petite body on his back. He said in a deep voice, "I'll go back to get my things and meet you at noon." "Okay." The tanned young man nodded and said seriously, "Then you better come early. My master always means what he says. If you're late, the caravan won't wait for you." Soren nodded and carried Vivian back to the slums. There was still some time before noon, so he could still go back to get his things. However, he didn't have much time to choose a mount. Soren could only raise the price to 20 Kindler coins and buy a strong traveling horse from other caravan merchants. On the other side, there was a large carriage in the middle of the caravan. A typical Northland merchant with a big beard walked into the carriage respectfully and knelt on the ground. "Master, we've sold all the goods. But because of the tight schedule, we've only earned less than 30% of our original profit. At the same time, we won't have enough time to purchase the goods. We'll lose even more profit at the next stop." The merchants below are complaining. There was a gauze curtain in the carriage. It was very spacious inside and there was enough room for a table. There were exquisite carpets and fabrics on all sides, and there were strange patterns on the walls. He could vaguely see the figure of a beautiful woman. She was lying lazily on the couch with a thin veil on her face. Her blue eyes were focused in front of him. It was a card that was pinched between her fingers. On the back of the card, there was a mysterious magic pattern that looked like a whirlpool. "I can smell the scent of death." The mysterious woman threw away the card and casually picked up a deck of tarot cards. On the card was a ferocious skeleton knight. She coldly said, "If anyone wants to stay, they can leave the caravan on their own. Otherwise, tell them to shut up." The bearded merchant nodded and got up from the floor. He said respectfully, "I'll tell them your order." A tired sigh sounded. The mysterious woman lay lazily on the long table. She held her head with one hand and pondered. She waved her hand and said, "You may leave. Tell them not to stay. Walk until the moon is high in the sky, then find a place with water to set up camp." A respectful response came from outside. The bearded merchant passed the message to the leader of the caravan guards. Then, the leader nodded with a serious expression and began to order the other guards to prepare the things. If they didn't stop on the road, everyone would have to bring food. This was a rare situation because the caravan would rest after walking for a while. If they kept walking, even the cows and horses that pulled the caravan wouldn't be able to take it. They would be exhausted the next day and they might even die from exhaustion. This order was only given to them under special circumstances. Walking from noon until the moon was high in the sky for 12 hours without stopping was not a simple task. Soren immediately returned to the slums. He packed up his things and brought Vivian to the horse market. He was going to buy a traveling horse at a 30% higher price. Originally, he planned to say goodbye to the priestess at the Dawn Temple, but things happened so suddenly that he didn't have time to think about it. He only hoped that they would meet again in the future. Soren didn't have much time from packing his things to buying a traveling horse. He arrived just before the caravan set off at noon. A bearded manager of the caravan told him a few words and then ordered the others to set off. The manager's words were simple. The caravan would go all out today and wouldn't stop until the moon was high in the sky. If they couldn't keep up with the caravan, they would be arranged to sit on a large cart. Many of the caravan's goods were sold off at a cheaper price. There was even a merchant from the northern lands who complained that he had only received 2/3 of the price for the goods that he had sold at a reduced price. If they left in such a hurry, they wouldn't even receive 1/3 of the goods. No one cared about him. When the time was up, the entire caravan started to move quickly. The workers climbed onto the caravan and began to drive the cows and horses forward. The guards of the caravan had already started to lead the way. Their job wasn't simply to follow the caravan. Only experienced adventurers were qualified to be the guards of the caravan because they acted as scouts to some extent when traveling in the wild. They would check if there were any monsters nearby, if there was any danger, if there was a need to change the route, if the caravan could pass through, if the caravan needed to be cleaned up in advance, if there were any holes in the road that would affect the caravan's progress, and so on. These tasks were all done by the guards of the caravan. They simply followed the caravan and waited for enemies to surround them before drawing their swords to cut them down. That was a scene from a third-rate story. It was purely to set off the main characters who wanted to show off their skills. That was why the guards of the caravan were written in such a way. They had to travel in the wild all year round. Even if they were an idiot, as long as they could survive, they would be trained to be an expert. The level of the guards of the caravan wasn't low. P.S. Let's fight for the first place tomorrow. What do you guys think? Chapter 30. Amber City, Garrison Force. A heavy warrior in full armor hurriedly walked into the room and said to the two people who were arguing, "Not good. Sir Callis, more than 10 people went missing last night. It seems like it was done by the fallen." The argument in the room stopped abruptly. Sir Callis, who represented the noble forces, was a man in his 40s with a thick beard. He had participated in the war in the north. He looked up with bloodshot eyes and said angrily, "What? More people went missing? You bunch of trash. It's been 5 days and you still haven't found the nest of those rats. What does the council pay you for? Opposite him was a knight with a solemn face. After hearing these words, he immediately stopped him and said in a deep voice, "Now is not the time to talk about this. The noble council must delegate its authority. The seriousness of this matter has exceeded the scope of the secular world. It must be handed over to the church in the city to deal with. I'll contact the Hand of Justice now and ask them to send out paladins to conduct a large-scale investigation." "Are we really going to send out the paladins?" Sir Kala's face showed a hint of hesitation. Paladins were stubborn people who could not tolerate sand in their eyes. Once they were sent out, it would mean a large-scale detect evil incident would happen. Not many nobles in Amber City were clean. Many gray areas were controlled by the nobles. Once the paladins were sent out, it would mean that Amber City would be cleansed. Not only would the evil fallen be found, but the paladins would also be found. Many of the gray areas controlled by the nobles in the city would also be cleansed by the paladins. By then, the strength of the nobles would be greatly reduced. At the same time, the influence of the church in the city would be greatly increased. Most of the time, unless there was no other way, the nobles would try their best to suppress the church's influence. Pantheon and fanatics were two extremes. If the paladins were sent out, the gray areas of Amber City would be swept clean. At that time he would offend many nobles. Smuggling, prostitution, slavery, black market. Which one of the gangs that controlled these gray interests wasn't supported by an aristocrat? No. Sir Kala gritted his teeth and retorted, "The 9th Division has been transferred back. We still have plenty of energy. I'll go look for His Excellency the City Lord now and fight for the highest level of search authority. I'll definitely find those hateful rats today." The highest level of search authority. This meant that they could also enter the homes of the nobles to search. After not finding any clues for so long, he was already suspecting that one of the nobles had fallen into the dark realm. "All right then." The solemn temple knight nodded and said in a serious voice, "Go and apply now. If you don't get it before dark, then I will work with the church in the city to deal with it. With so many people disappearing, I suspect that they are preparing for some evil sacrificial ceremony." Outside Amber City. It had been 3 hours since Soren left. The caravan left as soon as they said they would, without any delay. He rode behind the caravan on a traveling horse and Vivian sat in front of him. The little girl was almost weightless, and the traveling horse could easily bear the weight of the two of them. In the beginning there were large tracts of farmland outside Amber City. There were dozens of villages and towns around Amber City, and all the resources needed by the city were transported from here. Donkey carts, ox carts and bucket carts could be seen on the road. Farmers and small merchants were sending the goods they needed the next day to the city in advance. However, as they got further away from Amber City, the number of farmlands began to thin out, and large patches of wild forests began to appear in their sights. Occasionally there were also small villages with few people. The further away they were from the city, the more danger they would encounter. These small villages relied on their own militia to protect them, and very few guards from Amber City would come to clean up the nearby monsters. Unless they took the initiative to ask for help or persuaded their lord to help them. When they first left Amber City, the road was more than 10 meters wide, but now it had shrunk to 5 or 6 meters. The road had also become bumpy. Because it had rained some time ago, the road was very muddy. Sometimes when large carts were passing through, they needed people to push them over. The caravan guards were already in full operation. Some of the guards were scattered around on horseback, some began to check the situation of the road ahead, and some began to investigate the nearby environment. After they were 30 kilometers away from Amber City, they were considered to have entered the range of wild creatures. Soren was very quiet along the way. Vivian was also very obedient today. She did not make any noise along the way, and only curiously looked around with her big eyes. If there was anything she did not understand, she would ask Soren. The caravan did not pay much attention to this follower of theirs. The merchants were all busy with their own matters. The mysterious owner of the caravan did not show up either. The people in charge of the caravan were her 3 stewards. This was a large-scale caravan. Just the guards alone numbered more than 30. If the workers, servants, and slaves were included, there were more than 100 people in the caravan. This was a relatively common formation in the north. The ordinary merchants who were affiliated with the owner of the caravan had to organize their own carriages, manpower, and goods. They would then seek protection from the owner of the caravan during the journey, and after completing the journey, they would have to give 1/3 of their profits to the owner of the caravan. the mysterious descendant of the northern witches. The sound of horses galloping could be heard. The leader of the caravan's guards rode his horse to Soren's side. The view of the surroundings was much worse than before. The dense grass and trees hindered their vision, and there were barely any people around. A wanderer? The leader of the guards looked at Soren and said in a deep voice, "There's a situation up ahead. Come with me and take a look." Vivian nervously reached out and grabbed Soren's sleeve, but he comforted her by patting her shoulder and said, "I have to take care of my sister. She's still young. She can't ride a horse by herself." As soon as Soren finished speaking, the curtain of the carriage in the middle of the caravan was suddenly lifted, and a beautiful woman with a veil poked her head out. She glanced at Vivian, who was not far away, and a smile appeared on her face. She said gently, "This little girl can come to me. It's very comfortable and safe inside the carriage." Soren hesitated for a moment, then looked down at Vivian. The little girl tilted her head and thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "Okay. I like that big sister. She's not a bad person." Vivian's wisdom was as high as 18 points, which meant that her intuition was very good. Soren thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "That's good. You go to the carriage first, I'll go with them and take a look." Wanderer. This was the official title of a thief. They were the golden fingers of a profession, and they were involved in almost all fields. In the wilderness, a wanderer's detection ability was second only to a ranger's wilderness survival talent. The two quickly spurred their horses and rushed to the place where the situation was. The caravan's speed slowed down a little, and they only sped up after the guards confirmed that it was safe. "Leader. You're finally here." Soren turned around a mountain road, and the forest in front became more luxuriant. Not far away there were 3 caravan guards, all of whom were experienced in steady close combat professions. One of the guards, who had obvious northern characteristics, squatted down, pointed at the footprints on the ground, and said to the two of them, "Look. These are the footprints of goblins. Judging from the number, there are dozens of them, and there may be a natural warlock among them. These annoying things can't be killed no matter what. It's solved this year. Next year they'll give birth to a big nest again." Goblins' growth cycle was very short, and their survival ability was very tenacious. They could survive even if they ate grass. They were like weeds in the wild. After a batch was cleared, another batch would immediately emerge. It's really goblins. Soren glanced at the footprints left behind near the road. Some of them had been washed away by the rain, but he could still calculate the approximate number. However, the goblins wouldn't dare to attack the caravan. According to Soren's understanding of the goblins, these cowardly creatures would only dare to attack when their numbers were 5 to 10 times more than the enemy's. Any 5-man adventurer team would be able to deal with them. As if he saw the doubt on Soren's face, another caravan guard pushed aside the grass beside him and said in a low voice, "That's not the key. Look here." It was an area that was obviously different. The soil was very fresh, as if it had been dug up. The area was about 5 feet wide. There were bloodstains within 5 meters of it. Even if it had been washed away by the rain, it could still be seen. Clearly, these goblins encountered something. The leader of the caravan guards grabbed a handful of soil and sniffed it, then said in a low voice, "This thing is not small and it's very dangerous. The goblins can't hurt it at all." Soren's expression also became serious. He pushed the others aside and walked over. He pulled out his curved sword and stirred the soft soil, then frowned and said, "Burrowers? If it's really these things, then we're in trouble. They live in groups." Chapter 31. Ankegs. They were insect-type monsters that lived in the south. They were about 5 feet wide, 5 meters, and could reach up to 30 feet, 10 meters, in length. They had the ability to sense vibrations and could detect slight vibrations within a range of 60 feet. Ankegs had a pair of giant jaws that could break trees and bite their prey. They could also produce strong acid that could corrode their enemies. They looked like giant insects with 6 to 12 slender legs with sharp claws. At the same time, the Ankegs could also unleash a lethal acid spray attack on the enemy. If the enemy was not immune to the acid, they would die on the spot. Even if they were lucky enough to survive, they would be severely corroded. However, that was not the worst part. What was even more deadly was that the Ankegs were small social creatures. Most Ankegs moved in groups of 2 to 5. They liked to eat fresh meat, but they were also scavengers. They tended to be neutral and would not attack unless they were hunting. However, if they thought you were food, you would be in great danger. There were not many Ankegs in the south. They were mainly active in the southern region and only lived in a specific geographical environment. Generally, unless something happened, they would rarely leave their area of activity. There were almost no ankegs in the north because they liked soft and moist soil. The soil in the north was too hard due to the cold, making it unsuitable for ankegs. Creature trait. That was why the caravan guards were unable to identify the ankegs. Let's leave this place first. Soren looked around and said, "These monsters will hide underground. It's hard for us to find them. Everyone stay together. The ankegs can sense our footsteps. They like to attack lone prey." A message appeared in Soren's mind. It was the challenge information of the ankegs. Ankeg, Swarm, Grade 3. Challenge rating, Level 8 Monster Level, 10 Strong Acid Spray Ability. Highest and lowest attributes, 20 and 10, total attribute points, 80 to 90. Specialty, Strong Acid Spray Corrosive Damage Bite Attack. Difficulty, B+. The challenge rating of the ankegs was higher than the snake demons because they could appear and disappear unpredictably. They could burrow underground and appear in groups. He used to be a professional assassin for many adventurers. If it was a small adventurer team, once they were attacked, just the first round of strong acid spray would kill the team members. Dealing with this kind of bug required a very strong detection and eavesdropping ability. Otherwise, you'll need the wilderness survival skill to determine their location. Only then can you avoid being ambushed. Soren retreated cautiously. The others also seemed to realize the seriousness of the situation. They pulled out their weapons and retreated outside. Ankegs. Aren't they rarely seen? Could it be that the ankegs have gone berserk? Soren asked himself as he carefully observed his surroundings and focused his attention on the movements underground. Damn it. Although I've killed these insects before, I really didn't notice when they went berserk. And who was the one who completed the mission? It happened around the same time. Many major events happened in this world, including the skinning incident, the War of the Children of God, the ancient red dragon, the giant migration, and so on. Therefore, Soren did not have the energy to pay attention to something as trivial as the ankegs going berserk. If the major events that happened in the past were to be ranked, the skinning incident would be ranked B, the War of the Children of God would be ranked A+, and the birth of the ancient red dragon would be ranked A+. As for the ankegs going berserk, they were not even ranked D+. Unless such an event happened to happen around him, it would be convenient for him to investigate and complete the mission. Otherwise, very few people would pay attention to them. However, ankegs were a very rare insect species. While they were dangerous, they were also very valuable. This was because their shells were extremely sturdy and light. If a skilled blacksmith could be hired, the shells of the ankegs could be forged into a full-body armor that weighed only a third of a full-body armor. In many places, an ankeg armor like this could be sold for up to 3,000 Kindler coins. Even if the materials were sold, they could be sold for 600 to 800 Kindler coins. However, only skilled blacksmiths would buy them and others would not have any use for them. The shell of an ankeg could only be made with a special enchantment method, and the size of the armor was custom-made. Therefore, if one could not find a skilled blacksmith, the only way was to remove the head of the ankeg. It was a natural +1 shield with decent defense and strong acid resistance. If one could kill an ankeg, the reward would be even higher than killing a naga demon. Suddenly, a strange sound came from the ground. When Soren and the others retreated, they saw a huge bulge in the grass beside the road. Then a ferocious-looking gigantic ankeg crawled out from the ground. It opened its mouth and pounced on a horse, biting off its head in an instant. Large amounts of blood gushed out, and the only thing left on the ground was a dead horse with its head separated from its body. What a powerful bite! Soren's pupils shrunk, and he quickly hid behind a large tree. Ankegs had the ability to spray acid once a day, and it was a killing move for low-level professions. Its power was equivalent to a spell, Acid Arrow. The other guards also took cover, and at the same time they took out their crossbows and fired at the ankeg. "Cover me." The guard captain let out a roar and suddenly pulled out the long sword on his back. His figure also grew a little bigger. Blue veins like earthworms appeared on his thick and solid arms, and his skin was flushed red because of excessive blood flow. Following his roar, another guard rolled on the ground and took out a small round shield in front of his chest. At the same time he loaded a special crossbow bolt into the shield. Berserk? Soren's eyes narrowed and he muttered, "Northern barbarians?" Boom. There was a slight explosion as the bolt hit the ankeg's body. The ankeg immediately turned its head to face the caravan guard. Ding ding dang dang. Apart from the exploding bolt, the rest of the bolts bounced off the Ankheg's carapace. Only a small portion of the bolts managed to land on the Ankheg's carapace. As mentioned before, the Ankheg's carapace was equivalent to a full-body armor, so its frontal defense was also on the same level as a full-body armor. Normal crossbows had no effect on it at all. Only when the bolts hit its vitals would it be effective. Acid spray. The Ankheg spat out a thick, dark green liquid. The guard rolled on the ground to avoid it, but some of it still landed on him. The small round shield in the guard's hand was easily corroded, and the acid that splashed on his arm quickly corroded his leather armor. His flesh also began to smoke. The guard screamed in pain, gritted his teeth, and pulled out his weapon to cut off a piece of flesh from his shoulder. Heavy slash. The guard captain's eyes gradually turned red, and his bones began to crackle. He held his long sword with both hands and leaped 5 meters into the air before slashing at the Ankheg's head. Clang. The sound of metal colliding could be heard. The Ankheg screamed in pain as it shook its head and rammed into the guard captain. The guard captain twisted his body to avoid the fangs and stabbed behind him with his sword. The guard captain's weak skin was penetrated, and a dark green liquid gushed out from the wound. A Tier 3 warrior, northern barbarian. Soren did not expect the guard captain to be above LV-10. He spun around with his scimitar, then rolled out from behind the tree and ran past the Ankheg from the side. The Ankheg had already used its acid spray, which greatly reduced the threat to Soren. As long as he avoided its sharp teeth, even if he took 1 or 2 hits, it would not be fatal. How could he not fight for slaughter EXP? Give me a crossbow. Soren let out a low growl, and the nearby guards reacted quickly and threw their crossbows at Soren. Swoosh. Soren's fingers were so fast that they left afterimages. He finished reloading the crossbow in an instant and shot an arrow at the Ankheg's mouth. Attack its jaw. He threw away the crossbow that he had just fired and swooped down with his scimitar in one hand. When he passed by the Ankheg, he bent his knee and slid past it. The scimitar left a 2-foot-long wound on the Ankheg's front skin. Clang. The guard captain attracted the attention of the Ankheg from the front and scratched his chest with its sharp claws. Fortunately, he was still wearing his leather armor, so it only left a shallow wound. Roar. The guard captain's roar reverberated in the air as he swung his sword down and chopped off one of the Ankheg's limbs. After passing by the Ankheg, Soren rolled on the ground with one hand and did not stop at all. Instead, he stepped on the Ankheg's back and started running. The Ankheg was about 5 meters tall when it stood upright, which was the height of a 1-story building. Half of its body was still buried in the ground. Soren exerted strength in his legs and leaped up. He then held his scimitar with both hands and plunged it into the Ankheg's skull. Die. Dark green blood spurted out from the wound, and Soren felt a burning sensation on his arm. The Ankheg's huge body began to tremble and struggle, causing the surrounding soil to splatter everywhere. However, Soren did not flinch at all. Instead, he used his legs to clamp down on the Ankheg's skull to ensure his balance and strength. At the same time, he twisted the scimitar's hilt with both hands. His expression was slightly hideous. Blood splattered on his body, and some of his clothes were slightly corroded. Boom. The Ankheg fell to the ground with a dull thud. The Ankheg struggled violently before it died, and its huge body fell to the ground. Soren let go of his scimitar and lay on the ground, panting heavily. There were spots of blood on his arm, and some of his flesh was also corroded and burned. It's finally dead. He took a deep breath and stood up. Only then did he realize that his thigh had been cut open by the sharp edge of the Ankheg's shell when he was riding on it. Blood was gushing out of the wound. The battle was short. A battle of life and death could not be dragged on until one's stamina was depleted. A merchant guard came over to support Soren, who was swaying a little. He then applied some ointment on his wound and quickly asked, "Are you all right? Take off your clothes first. The liquid is very corrosive. Master will heal you later." One was heavily injured, while the other 2 were lightly injured. Soren took a deep breath and quickly bandaged his thigh. He then said, "Let's go now. Ankhegs live in groups. There should be other Ankhegs nearby. Our battle must have alerted them." Chapter 32. As expected. As soon as Soren finished his words, a strange noise was heard nearby. They immediately jumped on their horses and fled in the opposite direction, not even bothering about the loot. In less than 2 minutes, a huge chunk of grass rose from the side of the road, and an Ankheg emerged from the ground. That was not the end of it, as another Ankheg emerged from the ground, followed by a third. It was a small group of 4 Ankhegs. The others turned around and looked behind them. Immediately they broke out in cold sweat. If not for Soren reminding them to leave immediately, one or two of them would have died there. One Ankeg was already so difficult to deal with, and now there were three of them. Even with the strength of a Tier 3 northern barbarian, the captain of the escort team had little chance of surviving. The three Ankegs only needed one round of acid to wipe out half of them, and the rest would not even last a single round of attack. This was also why Ankegs had a higher challenge rating than snake demons. The Ankegs were aware of their dead companions, and they had a certain level of animal instincts. They let out a sharp shriek in the direction of Soren and the others, and immediately burrowed into the ground to chase after them. However, their speed was obviously slower than horses, and they soon emerged from the ground not far away, staring in the direction where they left. Even wolves knew how to take revenge, let alone supernatural creatures like Ankegs. "Thank you for your help." The guard captain reached out and patted Soren's shoulder. He then held his injured companion tightly and urged his horse to rush in the direction of the caravan. Soren's injuries were slightly better, and he was only affected by the acidic blood. The caravan guard who blocked the acid spray from the front was not in a good condition. Even though his shield blocked most of the acid spray, a lot of it still landed on his body. Now many parts of his skin were burned and rotted. This was the horror of the Ankeg's acid spray. Not only was it corrosive, but it was also poisonous due to the fact that Ankegs were creatures. Fortunately, this was only an Ankeg. If it was a wyvern with a challenge rating of 15, its acid spray could even melt armor. That was the real deal. The corrosiveness and toxicity of the wyvern spray attack was one of the best below the legend rank. Wyverns also live in groups. Soon the caravan appeared before them. The guards reacted very quickly. Immediately someone came over to support them. At the same time, nearly a third of them pulled out their weapons and automatically surrounded the others. The merchants commanded their workers to gather the carts together and form a simple caravan formation. This was a method used by experienced merchants to defend against the attacks of bandits. "Take me to master." The guard captain took a deep breath and carried his companion down from the horse. In just a short while, the merchant guard's face was as pale as a sheet of paper. It was not only because of the corrosive acid, but also because of the poison that had seeped into his body and the severe loss of blood. Adventuring in the wild not only took away the lives of enemies, but also many further deteriorated injuries, even though their bodies were far stronger than those of the previous earthlings. The caravan guards quickly gathered together. The archers stood on top of the carts, and the warriors in leather armor held up their shields. For a moment they actually looked like an army. The northern merchants. They were the strongest among the merchants because most of the guards they hired were retired warriors. Many players who became bandits in the past called them hard bones to chew. The curtains of the large carriage, which was protected by the caravan, were lifted and a beautiful woman wearing a veil appeared. She glanced at the injured guard and said in a serious voice, "Clean his wounds immediately and send him to the carriage." After that, she turned to look at Soren and said, "You too. I have a special ointment here. Let them apply it on your wounds." The others sent the warrior to clean his wounds, and the guard captain reported the situation to her. Everything seemed to be in order and there was no trace of panic. And the center of all this order was this mysterious woman, the descendant of the northern witches. Under her orders, everyone followed them strictly. The merchants who were panicking at the beginning also calmed down and took out some healing potions that they had prepared in advance. The northern witches were mysterious and powerful existences. In some ways they were even more dangerous than the southern witches. Not only did they have mysterious spells, but they also inherited some of the witch doctor's innate abilities. This was one of the most difficult professions to level up. Advancement requirement. Grade 3 Spellcasting Level 5, Prophecy Ability. The heavily injured man was quickly carried over, and the guard captain personally applied medicine on his wounds before pouring a bottle of healing potion down his throat. Soren's injuries were not serious, but Vivian still applied the healing potion all over his body as if he was facing a great enemy. She also carefully bandaged the wound on his thigh, not caring about wasting the precious medicine. She even personally fed Soren another bottle of healing potion. The little girl rarely cried when she grew up. Most of the time, when she saw Soren injured, she would silently help him treat his wounds. She would never cry like other little girls. The tacit understanding between the two of them when they were young made her the one who would help Soren whenever he needed to kill someone. Even though she was very kind. "Ankegs?" The mysterious woman frowned. She glanced at Soren and asked the guard captain, "What do we do now? Do we continue forward?" The guard captain showed a troubled expression and said, "I'm not too sure about the habits of these creatures. Maybe he will know more." Everyone looked at Soren. Soren was trying to cheer up the little girl whose eyes were slightly red with tears. When the little girl pulled on his sleeve, he realized that everyone was looking at him. He quickly said, "Ankhegs are very stubborn creatures. They rarely leave their territory. There must be a reason why they are here. But since they are here, they won't leave anytime soon. So there are only two ways. One is to kill them. Otherwise they will attack the caravan when it passes by. The other is to avoid them and take another route. These creatures won't track us. Dieter." The mysterious woman frowned and immediately ordered, "Norad, take some people and kill them." Her tone was unquestionable, and the guard captain named Norad did not hesitate at all. He immediately said in a deep voice, "As you wish, mistress. I will take some people to deal with these problems." After he finished speaking, he began to prepare his men. He ordered some people to take out some shields and left half of them to protect the caravan while the other half followed him to deal with the Ankhegs. Most of the people in the caravan called the mysterious woman their mistress. This meant that she was very noble. Even if the others were not her slaves, they were still her servants. As for the identity of this mysterious woman, Sauron could not help but feel a little curious. The Northern Witches. These women could have their own territory in the kingdom of the Frost Goddess. They were definitely not simple characters. Not to mention they were also a group of dangerous wizards. Soren thought for a while and stood up. "I will go with you. I have some experience in dealing with these things. I want to. It will be much easier to kill them." After he finished speaking, he comforted Vivian and told her that he would be fine. He then mounted his horse and followed the caravan. Since Soren was only a follower, the mistress of the caravan did not ask him to come along. This was a basic form of respect, but the captain of the guard still looked at Soren when he gathered his men. It was obvious that he wanted Soren to come along. The mysterious woman nodded slightly. The guard captain rode to Soren's side and said in a deep voice, "Don't do anything later. Just tell us the weakness of these worms." Soren touched his curved sword and moved his body a little. He felt the effects of his injuries and said, "I know. Get people to prepare more shields. These worms can release a lethal acid spray. Normal leather armor is useless against them. I will think of a way to lure them out later." After killing the Ankheg, Soren received more than 900 slaughter EXP. After leveling up to grade 2, Soren needed 3000 slaughter EXP to level up to grade 6 rogue. Now he could not just rely on picking locks and disarming traps. He needed to kill the monsters himself. This time with so many people, it was a safe and reliable way to earn slaughter EXP. It would be best if he could get another 900 slaughter EXP. After all, he would not have many chances to encounter these monsters in the future. He also did not have much confidence in killing them alone. It was a normal adventure. Even if he single-handedly cleared out a small group of kobolds, 15 to 30, and an awakened kobold sorcerer, the slaughter EXP he gained was only about 800. He would not let go of this opportunity to increase his strength. P.S. Regarding the exhaustion of stamina after using burst mode, you can watch the heavyweight boxing matches. These are all professional fighters with 15 constitution. Their stamina will drop after a few rounds. Chapter 33. Adventuring in the Wild. Not everyone could calmly face the death of a teammate who had fought side by side with them. That was why the captain of the guards had gathered the best of the best. Soren glanced at them and found that most of them were at least grade 2, which was the easiest profession to train. Other professions required a lot of resources to train, especially spellcasters. Only warriors could be trained as long as they had enough meat to replenish their nutrients and the corresponding training techniques. However, high-level warriors were more particular about their aptitude, and those who could reach grade 3 or above were not easy to deal with. "Spread out. Raise your shields." Soren took over the command and said in a deep voice, "Before the Ankhegs attack, there will be some movement on the ground. Be careful of those strange sounds. Everyone stay at least 5 steps away from the Ankhegs. It's best not to take the acid attack head-on. Try to avoid it if you can and make sure there's enough space between you and the Ankhegs. Don't use your crossbows. They won't be of much use against the Ankhegs unless you have a sharpshooter among you. Don't attack their backs. The Ankhegs have the weakest defense around their abdomens. Be careful of their sharp claws. These Ankhegs are very strong. Remember to move around them. Don't take their attacks head-on unless it's absolutely necessary. They can reach a height of 5 meters when standing upright and they can swoop down on you. Protect your heads. The burrower's bite is strong enough to break trees. If the enemy tries to bite you, roll forward immediately. This is the Ankheg's blind spot. Their teeth won't be able to reach within a radius of 1.5 meters in front of you. Orders were given one after another. The other guards of the caravan could not help but reveal a trace of shock on their faces, which then gradually turned into respect. This was the respect they had for the strong. Strength didn't just refer to how strong one was. One's wisdom and experience were also a part of one's strength. Experience and wisdom were often more useful than brute force. Soren felt like he had regained the feeling he had when he was adventuring in the wild. After becoming a legend, there were very few wild creatures that could threaten him. It had been a long time since he had experienced such a battle. The two most important things to do when dealing with an Ankheg were to avoid its acid spray and bite attack. The acid spray was needless to say, but the bite attack that could tear through trees was just as deadly. However, as arthropods, Ankhegs had certain blind spots when they attacked. For example, they couldn't bend their bodies more than a meter in front of them. Since half of the burrower's body was underground, it wasn't convenient for it to move around. At times like this, you just have to be careful of the 6 to 12 legs on their bodies. Actually, there was a simpler way to deal with the Ankhegs. That was the mysterious descendant of the Northern Witch. The power of magic was very powerful, and many times, it could achieve unexpected results. However, spellcasters wouldn't easily make a move. Because they had to ensure that their spells were used at the most critical moment, the main members of the wilderness adventuring team were still warriors. The number of spells he could cast was limited. Under normal circumstances, spellcasters would use light crossbows, short bows, catapults, and other long-range weapons to assist in battle. They would also use a staff to help out as long as they didn't hit their own people. Only when they were dealing with a large number of enemies or boss-level creatures would they cast spells without holding back. A Grade 2 wizard could only cast a dozen or so spells in a day. Their lethality was enough. However, their stamina was not as good. Dismount. Before they even got close, Sauron ordered everyone to dismount and walk on foot. He then laid on the ground and listened for a moment before he ordered the others, "Stomp your feet. Maintain the same rhythm. Stomp your feet as hard as you can. Pay attention to your surroundings." Ankhegs had the ability to sense vibrations, so they were very sensitive to vibrations from the ground. This was the easiest way to anger them. As expected, a slight noise came from the ground, and the ground seemed to bulge a little. "They're down there." Soren yelled and began to retreat. He was still injured, so he wasn't in a good condition to fight them head-on. He would have to deal the finishing blow if necessary. "Spread out." The captain of the guards roared, and his muscles began to swell. The northern barbarian's berserk ability was very special. Due to the harsh cold and the special training method, they wouldn't be weakened after going berserk. The only downside was that they couldn't go berserk for long. Orc berserkers and barbarians could go berserk for 15 minutes to half an hour. During this period, their stamina and explosive power would be strengthened several times, turning them into killing machines. However, the northern barbarians could only go berserk for a few minutes. They were an advanced warrior class, so they weren't categorized as barbarians. Crick. A strange noise came from the ground, and an Ankheg suddenly emerged from the ground and spat acid at the warrior closest to it. The warrior rolled awkwardly on the ground. The warrior dodged half of the attack and covered himself with his shield at the critical moment. Successful dodge. Most of the acid landed on the shield, but the warrior didn't suffer any damage. Kill it. The captain of the guards rushed toward the Ankheg with his sword in hand, and the guards scattered around the area also began to attack. 5 warriors moved closer to the Ankheg, while the others remained scattered around to keep watch. There were other movements underground, but the Ankheg didn't come out like a swarm of bees. They were waiting for an opportunity, waiting for the enemy to be distracted so that they could ambush the lone barbarian. Damn it. Soren's expression changed drastically. He ran forward frantically and picked up a shield at the same time. The Ankheg had found him. Since he was far from the battlefield, he became the lone barbarian in the eyes of the Ankheg. Hiss. An Ankheg emerged from behind Soren and spat acid at him. Soren rolled and dodged. His 20 points of agility saved Soren's life at the last moment. He dodged the acid by a hair's breadth and used his shield to block the splashing acid. Finally, the last Ankheg emerged. However, because of Soren's sudden appearance, the others were slightly distracted. One of the guards was hit in the arm, and half of the flesh on his arm was corroded. That guy was also a ruthless character. He actually made a prompt decision to cut off his own arm. Then he clenched his teeth and bandaged the wound. The severed arm fell to the ground and quickly corroded to the point where one could see the white bones. Kasadu. Another guard of the caravan roared as if he wanted to rush over to help him. Don't be distracted. The caravan guard whose arm had been cut off reached out to stop him. Then he stepped back and said in a low voice, I'm fine. Kill them first. It was common for warriors to be injured, so they had a high tolerance for pain. However, the guard was able to withstand the pain of losing an arm and still remain calm. This made Soren think highly of him. The guard's willpower was definitely strong, but northerners were born with strong willpower. Perhaps the harsh environment had trained them since they were young. It seemed like he was a retired soldier. Only a soldier who was used to life and death could be so resolute. Attack their lower limbs. Since he was already a target, Soren could not care less. He gritted his teeth and pulled out his scimitar. He began to circle around the ankheg, attacking it from time to time when it was attacking the others. He left wounds on the weakest parts of the ankheg's body. As for attacking the head of the ankheg, it was obviously impossible for him to do so. The injury on his leg had affected his agility. Such a dangerous move could only be attempted when he was in peak condition. Otherwise he would be risking his life. A deep roar echoed in the air. The guard captain seized the opportunity and jumped up. Just like Soren, he stabbed his sword into the ankheg's brain through the gap in its shell. The first ankheg fell to the ground with a loud thud. The pressure on the others was relieved. Soren took the opportunity to leave the battlefield and look for a chance to kill the ankheg in one shot. The opportunity came quickly. When an ankheg was about to bite its target, he took a deep breath and started running. He then jumped up and slashed his scimitar at the side of the ankheg's head. A dark green liquid splashed out. The ankheg's body stiffened for a moment before it fell to the ground. There was only one left. Just as the others were about to finish off the last ankheg, the heavily injured one suddenly shrieked and waved its limbs wildly as it burrowed into the ground. It was trying to escape. Soren did not hesitate. He took a deep breath and calmed his heartbeat. He then shouted at another warrior, "Give me a javelin." A long spear was thrown at him. Soren reached out and took the spear. He turned it around and turned the tip of the spear downwards. Then he jumped up abruptly, reaching a height of 4 or 5 meters. He roared, held the handle of the spear with both hands and stabbed it into the ground. Splat. Dark green blood splattered out. A sharp screech was heard from the ground, and the earth trembled. Soren held the spear tightly and used all his strength to drive the spear into the ground bit by bit. Finally, the ground gradually calmed down. The battle was over. Profession information, Northern Barbarian. They have a unique berserk technique. When they train, they will soak their entire body in ice water. The cold will suppress their berserk strength, and they are unable to increase their strength as much as the barbarians. However, it also reduces the exhaustion of their body's potential. At the same time, they retain their rationality, allowing them to still have decent combat strength after going berserk. Berserk +2 strength, +1 vitality. Chapter 34. The wound opened up again. When Soren let go of the spear, his leg was already bleeding profusely. He was in better condition at the beginning of the battle, but the last 2 leaping attacks had worsened his injury. The wound that had already closed up had opened up again due to the excessive use of force, and it seemed to be even more serious than before. As a result, Soren was limping and had to be carried by the other caravan guards on horseback. But it was worth it. Soren received 1800 slaughter EXP this time. If he wanted to, he could level up to level 6 right away. Let the caravan come over first. Soren glanced at the guard captain and saw that he was also looking at him. He then said in a deep voice, "These worms are worth quite a lot. But it's hard for us to dig them out. Let the others help. Also, I think you guys will need some money too." After he finished speaking, he looked at the other warriors. One of them was severely injured, while the other 6 had light injuries. The ones with light injuries were slightly better. At most, they were scratched by the worms and would recover in a day or 2. However, the severely injured warrior had lost an arm, which meant that his career was over. It was impossible for ordinary people to afford the extremely expensive limb regrowth. The cost of casting a high-level divine spell was more than 3,000 gold dirhams. Moreover, they had to pay a corresponding price. Priest's health. Otherwise, Soren would not have waited for half a month to get someone to cast greater restoration, on him after he was severely injured. According to the rules of this trade, if the caravan guards encountered monsters or bandits on the way, the spoils of war would belong to the caravan guards. The money they exchanged for would also be given to them to settle down the injured and compensate the families of the injured. This time no one died. This was already considered fortunate. After all, there were bound to be some casualties when challenging an Ankeg above one's level. Ankegs are level 10. Caravan guards have an average level of 6 to 7. Mark. The guard captain nodded and ordered one of his men, "Go and call them over. Let's drag these worms out together. Be careful of their blood. The blood of these things is acidic. Wrap your hands with a cloth and try not to touch them directly." The most valuable part of an Ankeg is the carapace on its head. It can be used to make armor, and it's also the hardest part of its body. Soren did not help this time. He just sat on his horse and watched the battle unfold. Do you see the carapace by its mouth? It can be used as a part of a gauntlet. It's something that can be easily sold. Pry open the skull from the front. This is a natural enchanted shield. You can use it after forging it. It can be sold for 150 Kindler coins in the city. Get someone to peel off the carapace on the tail. These are used to make half-body armor. The carapace on the back is basically useless. The size is not very suitable. Unless we can find an expert to make a tower shield. The meat of these things is useless. Blood is easy to sell in the swamp, but basically no one needs it here. Get someone to dig out his heart. Some wizards need this kind of strong heart. It should be worth around 10 Kindler coins. Soren said as he ordered them to dismember the Ankegs and take out the materials that could be sold for gold coins. The respect on the others' faces became more and more obvious. It was not only because Soren killed 2 Ankegs, but also because of his wealth of knowledge. Experienced teammates like him were the most welcome. They could discover wealth that others didn't know about and maximize the benefits they could get from a battle. They really needed a sum of money. Their injured comrade needed a retirement fund. At the very least, it was enough for him to buy a piece of land and ensure his income for the rest of his life. The caravan soon arrived. The merchants ordered their workers to help them drag the Ankegs out from the ground and load the valuable items onto the carts. A small group of guards stood guard while the others busied themselves with work. After the intense battle, a rare smile appeared on the guards' faces. According to Soren, the 3 Ankegs were worth around 1,500 Kindler coins. It was almost the same as their employment fee. Even if they deducted the retirement fund for their injured comrade, each of them would still get around 10 Kindler coins. The captain had already discussed this with them before they dealt with the corpses. He would get 10% of the profits, the heavily injured Gezer would get 15%, the injured would get 20%, 6 people, the ones who participated in the battle would get 15%, 9 people, the ones who didn't participate in the battle would get 10%, 18 people, and finally, Soren would get the remaining 30%. It was a very fair distribution. Soren had contributed a lot in this battle, and without him, it wouldn't have been so easy. Someone might have died in the battle. Fair distribution was the most important factor in maintaining a team, and it was even more important than the friendship that came from fighting side by side. With around 200 Kindler coins and his previous savings, it was enough for his injured comrade to return to his hometown and buy a piece of land that was about 100 acres. He could then hire farmers to farm the land and become a rich farmer. This way he would have enough money for the rest of his life, and he wouldn't have to live in poverty because of his broken arm. In fact, many adventurers were very concerned about this. They were in a business that involved blood on the edge, and no one knew when they would no longer be able to pick up a knife. The caravan continued to move forward. Because of the respect the guards had for Soren, the other merchants were also in awe of him, and there was even a hint of curiosity on their faces. Wanderers. These people were either notorious thieves or legendary figures in the wilderness. People who wandered alone in the wilderness were qualified to become the main characters in the stories told by the bards. For example, Aragorn was the main character in The Lord of the Rings. On the large carriage, the mysterious woman glanced at the body of the Ankeg, and as if she could feel the fierce battle that had just begun, she ordered, "Tell the merchants to prepare some compensation. I'll only take 20% of the profits this time." The servant in charge quickly retreated and began to discuss with the merchants. Obviously, she didn't realize that Soren had already maximized the profits from the battle. After the mysterious woman finished speaking, she glanced at Soren and noticed the bloodstains on his thigh. She frowned and said, "Come to the carriage. The wound on your thigh needs to be stitched up, or else it won't be easy for you to recover. Soren felt the wound on his thigh, then immediately got down from the horse and staggered into the carriage. The interior of the carriage was very spacious. The room was covered with soft woolen cloth. Just by looking at it, one could feel that it was very comfortable. In the middle of the room was a low table with a metal copper stove, unknown, and a deck of tarot cards thrown on top of it. It was said that the northern witches could rely on them to predict fortune and misfortune. There was a faint fragrance in the air. He couldn't tell what it was, but it made him feel refreshed. It was similar to the fragrance that wizards used when they were preparing to memorize spells. The mysterious woman bent down and rummaged around. Her full and round buttocks were like a full moon, and it attracted Soren's attention. It was very rude to look at a woman's buttocks, especially when she was treating his wound. So Soren quickly looked away and put the clothes under his thigh to prevent the blood from falling on the expensive fur. "Do you want to do it yourself? Or do you want me to do it?" The mysterious woman took out a curved silver needle and a translucent thread. The needle was made of a special material and wouldn't cause the wound to become infected. Soren glanced at it and said in a low voice, "I'll do it myself." "Okay." The mysterious woman lit a candle and put the needle on it to warm it. Then she put the needle through the translucent thread and handed it to Soren. Sizzle. Soren took the needle and untied the bandaged wound. He then pierced the needle into the flesh and sutured it. The pain made him suck in a breath of cold air. Then he clenched his teeth and started to suture the wound bit by bit. This kind of wound needed to be sutured in order to heal quickly. Otherwise, even if he used healing potions, it wouldn't be very effective. Even the slightest movement could cause the wound to open again. Although the healing potion had some magical and divine effects, it wasn't omnipotent. When Soren finished suturing the wound that was almost half a foot long, his whole body was covered in cold sweat. The mysterious woman looked at him silently and said, "It seems like you've learned how to bandage wounds? It's a necessary skill in the wild." Soren replied casually. Then he took out a bandage and applied some ointment, carefully wrapping it around the wound. At the same time, a row of data appeared. Suture successful. You've successfully sutured the wound. You've reduced your injury. Heal +2. At this time, Soren finally had the time to look at his stats page. He didn't know when, but there were a lot of new skills. They were all basic skills that were commonly used. Name: Soren. Race: half-elf. Attributes: Strength 14 +2, Dexterity 20 +1, Vitality 19, Intelligence 18 +1, Wisdom 15, Charm 16. Alignment: Lawful Evil. Profession: Level 10 Commoner, Max, /Level 5 Rogue 0/3000, Grade 2. Health points: 5252. Experience points: 3650, Slaughter EXP, 100, Profession EXP, Unassigned, Skill points, none. Attribute points, none. Status, Normal. Basic skills: Sneak 103, Steal 35, Pick Lock 45, Snare 55, Negotiate 3, Appraise 1, Deceive 3, Act 1, Literacy 1, Dodge Roll 5, Listen 3, Heal 2, Spell Identify 1. Legendary skills: Omnipotent Hands, Sealed, Weakened. Personal abilities: Nimble Left Hand, Eidetic Memory. Perseverance. Profession abilities: Grasp of Shadows. Military Weapon, Proficiency, Combat skills, Shadow Strike. Other than the basic skills that he had learned at the beginning, Soren also gained 3 Listen, to fight against Ankegs, 5 Dodge, to fight against Ankegs, 1 Negotiate, to fight against Ankegs, and 2 Heal, to fight against Ankegs. It seemed like his basic skills could be leveled up through training. Chidien.com welcomes readers to visit and read our latest, fastest, and hottest serialized works on Chidien Originals. Mobile users can read it at Chidien.com. Chapter 35. They cleaned up the battlefield. The caravan continued to move forward. Soren couldn't ride a horse due to his injuries, so he could only sit on one of the carriages. The mysterious woman didn't invite him into the carriage since they weren't that close. However, she did invite Vivian, but the girl shook her head and refused. She climbed onto the carriage and sat beside Soren. The group continued to move forward in silence. The caravan guards continued to investigate the area, and from time to time, they would call for people to fill up the holes on the roads. The heavy rain had turned the roads into muddy roads, and there were even puddles of water in them. Soren was very dirty and Vivian was patting the dust off him. Of course, he couldn't care less about his image during a battle. He rolled and dodged on the ground, and by the time he was dry he was covered in mud. The little girl was carefully patting him down, and she even used her small hands to rub the dust off his clothes. The others were busy with their own matters, and when they saw the two people on the carriage they couldn't help but smile. Their impression of the two had improved a little. Especially the mysterious woman sitting in the carriage. She would occasionally lift the curtain and look at the two of them. Of course, her gaze was mostly on the cute little girl, as if there was something about her that attracted her attention. The scene at this moment was very peaceful. Soren sat cross-legged on the carriage and used a rag to wipe his scimitar. The blood of the ankheg was acidic, and if it wasn't cleaned properly, it would affect the weapon's use. The little girl sat beside him and wiped the mud off his clothes. Occasionally she would even puff up her mouth and blow on his clothes. Due to the poor quality of the cloth, the mud had seeped into the gaps of his clothes. The coarse cloth wasn't dense enough. Even after patting it clean, the little girl was still a little dissatisfied. Use this. The captain of the guard smiled as he rode past. He took out a pouch and threw it to Soren. This is refined essential oil. It can be used to maintain your weapon. Naturally, a scimitar wasn't something that could be polished by just polishing it. For people like them who relied on fighting and killing to survive, a good weapon meant the guarantee of their lives. Soren smiled and reached out to take it. Using his fingers, he took out some ointment and carefully smeared it on the curved sword. This refined ointment could prevent weapons from rusting. It was best to have some on hand before obtaining an extraordinary weapon. Even if it was an extraordinary grade enchanted weapon, it still needed to be maintained regularly. This was an attitude towards battle. Soren wiped his scimitar dry with a cloth and put it back into the scabbard. Perhaps it was because of the exhaustion from the battle, or perhaps it was because he had lost a lot of blood when he was first injured, but he looked tired and sleepy. Unknowingly he leaned against the cart and dozed off. The little girl looked at him quietly. Perhaps she was a little tired, so she leaned her head against his chest, careful not to touch his wound. The caravan continued to move forward. Occasionally there would be guards riding on the road, but they would also slow down a little. This was a form of respect for the strong. Soren might not be able to beat them one-on-one. However, he had earned the respect of the guards during the battle against the Ankhegs. In fact, Soren was not asleep. In fact, he rarely fell asleep in the wilderness. Most of the time he was in a state of feigning sleep. He was half asleep. Even the slightest noise would wake him up. He knew how dangerous the wilderness was, and he had to be vigilant at all times. It was already evening. The caravan still had no intention of stopping. When Soren woke up, he found the little girl sleeping in his arms. He carefully pulled his arm out, trying not to wake Vivian up. Unfortunately, the little girl opened her eyes and rubbed them. She looked up and said, "Brother? You're awake?" Soren nodded with a smile and reached out to stroke her hair. A caravan guard who had fought the Ankhegs with him passed by and threw some bread and meat to him with a smile. There were not many rules when adventuring in the wilderness. The bread was prepared in advance and was a little hard. The meat was air-dried and was easier to swallow because it was still warm in his arms. People who spent a lot of time in the wilderness would keep their food close to their chest and mouth. This way the food would not be too cold to swallow. Soren broke off a piece of bread and gave it to Vivian. He then tore off a piece of meat. Since they were not going to start a fire, there was no soup. Soren swallowed the food with water and whispered, "Let's set up camp later. I'll make you something good to eat." They were in the wilderness. With his skills, hunting 2 rabbits was a piece of cake. Since there were no traces of human activity, there were a lot of wild animals here. The only problem was that starting a fire might alert the monsters in the wilderness. However, with so many people around, there was nothing to be afraid of. The little girl was not picky at all. She quietly swallowed the bread with water. Suddenly, she seemed to feel something and looked up at the forest not far away. She pulled Soren's clothes with her small hand and whispered, "Big brother. Something seems to be watching us over there." Soren held his scimitar and stood on top of the cart to look around. Unfortunately, he could not see anything. However, based on his past experience, he could tell what was watching them. "It's okay." He gently rubbed the little girl's head and said slowly, "It's a gnoll that lives here. It must have noticed us. But these things don't dare to attack a large caravan. We'll leave their area of activity later." Gnolls. One of the most common creatures in the wilderness. They were more dangerous than goblins and kobolds. They had sharp fangs and claws and were agile. At the same time, they were also quite intelligent. These creatures liked to attack lone travelers. However, when it came to large caravans, they rarely attacked large groups of prey unless they were strong enough to defeat them. Gnolls were not very large carnivores. Most of them only had 15 to 30 gnolls, and they were scattered into 5 to 8 family units. Compared to attacking heavily guarded caravans, they were more inclined to hunt wild beasts and goblins. At least the latter was not very dangerous. If they attacked humans in the wilderness, they would not be able to avoid casualties. Generally, when there were more than 5 people in a group, the gnolls would choose to attack in the middle of the night. At first they would stalk their prey quietly. Because the forest nearby was getting thicker, the caravan guards also shrank their scouting formation. The number of scouts at the front was increased to 5 to ensure that there would be reinforcements in case of an accident. Some of the merchants were already complaining. It was very troublesome to travel in the dark. If there was not enough light, the cows and horses would have to slow down. Fortunately, soon a bright moon appeared. The moon was very bright today. The cold moonlight illuminated the surroundings, making it easier for them to move forward. The caravan guards lit up their torches. The workers also placed the torches that they had prepared in advance on the big carriages. In the middle of the big carriage, the mysterious woman quietly walked out. She stood on the shaft of the carriage and looked around. Then she pointed her finger at the top of the carriage and uttered a strange syllable. Then the top of the big carriage lit up. Illumination. The mysterious woman's wizard level was probably not low. She was able to light up an area of hundreds of feet. 30 meters, 50 meters. The caravan cheered. The power of the spell made many people excited. The merchants also showed a relieved smile. That sister's spell is so powerful. The little girl quietly approached Soren and whispered, "My illumination spell is so small, but she can light up such a large area." She was at least a professional level 15. Soren looked at the carriage. He did not expect the mysterious woman to be a senior witch. The light made it easier for the caravan to move forward. However, it also exposed their location. Pairs of green eyes could be seen in the dark forest nearby. Those were the wolves and beasts that lived nearby. Whoa! A loud wolf howl echoed in the wilderness. A calf-sized wolf king appeared on a small hill in the distance. It was a wild warg. It took a deep look at the caravan in the distance, and its eyes locked onto the big carriage. As if it felt the gaze of the mysterious woman, its strong body trembled, and then it let out a low howl. Waves of wolf howls could be heard. The wolves that were hiding in the darkness walked out one after another. Their green eyes disappeared as they followed the wolf king in other directions. Wargs were quite intelligent. They were even smarter than warhorses. There were still many prey to hunt in the wilderness. There was no need to provoke this caravan. Not to mention that there was a wizard among them. Their fear of spellcasters had long seeped into their blood for thousands of years. Countless painful lessons had taught these wild beasts that they should never provoke those who could cast spells. As long as they did not provoke them, these beasts would not easily attack those who could cast spells. Chapter 36. The night was getting darker. The 12 hours of continuous trekking had already made many people feel very tired. Even the warriors, whose physiques were far superior to ordinary people, had a look of exhaustion on their faces. The task of the guards was not simply to follow the caravan. It was very tiring to keep an eye on the situation. Under normal circumstances, they would spend less than 6 hours a day on the road. However, the mysterious mistress did not order them to stop, so they had no choice but to move on. Many of them were already complaining. Soren was very quiet in the night. His figure was slightly hazy, as if the night had automatically wrapped around him. The road ahead was getting worse and worse. Since they were far away from Amber City, the road had not been traveled by for a long time. Only when they were about 50 kilometers away from the next city would the road gradually recover, and there would be traces of human activity. The mysterious mistress looked very cautious. She did not return to the carriage. Instead, she stood on the carriage and looked ahead. Occasionally, she would look back in the direction of Amber City. Suddenly, she frowned and looked into the distance. She snorted coldly and said, "How dare you use a prophecy spell on me?" A cold light flashed. A dark golden card appeared on her fingertips. On the back of the card was a 9-pointed star array. On the front, the outline of a crown could be vaguely seen. Soren's eyesight was not that good yet, so he could not see it clearly. In an instant, the stars in the sky seemed to have dimmed. The mysterious mistress' face was filled with anger. She uttered a series of strange syllables, and the air around her seemed to have frozen. The caravan guards around her spontaneously gathered around her. They did not even care about the merchants nearby. It seemed that the mistress' safety was the most important thing to them. Wizards were at their weakest when they were casting spells. This was not the time to let others get close to her. So, the incantations of spells were all strange monosyllabic and polysyllabic. They were different from the language used by normal people. Without special training, it was very difficult to say these words. Casting language, casting gesture. Basic ability. A bright light appeared. The mistress sneered and slowly put away the card. She waved her hand tiredly and said, "It's safe now. There's a lake up ahead. We'll set up camp there." Amber City. In the mysterious basement, the red-robed priest standing on the altar suddenly trembled and spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was pale as he muttered, "The prophecy failed. Someone interfered with my prophecy spell." Counterspell, prophecy counterspell. The opponent might be a legendary magus. The Son of God's aura has been concealed by him. Awaken the Terror Knight immediately. The Son of God will awaken amidst the aura of despair and fear. At that time my Lord's will descend upon him. Let's begin the sacrificial ceremony. Depraved prayers echoed in the dark basement. The followers in black robes slit the throats of the sacrifices with daggers. Blood flowed along the demonic array and seeped into the marble coffins around them. The ripples of undead energy began to spread. The aura of destruction from the abyss shrouded the surroundings. The marble coffins turned into dust in the violent energy storm. Along with the sound of heavy armor clanking, 8 fearsome knights covered in pitch-black heavy armor stood up. They had blood-red pupils as if there were flames burning in them. From the moment they woke up, the merciless killing had already shrouded the basement. The Terror Knights pulled out their heavy beheading swords and began to kill the evil believers in the basement. Blood and limbs splattered everywhere. The red-robed priest did not seem to have expected such a thing to happen. He stiffened and collapsed on the altar. A loud neigh sounded. Blood gathered in the blasphemous language. The Dread Knight knelt on the ground with one knee and stabbed the pitch-black executioner's sword into the magic circle. Then, with a blazing flame, nightmares rushed out from the bloody void one after another. There were no words. The Terror Knights mounted their horses, and the shadows of vengeful spirits could be seen on their mottled black cloaks. The nightmares' hooves burned with scorching flames. They raised the beheading swords in their hands and slammed directly into the basement wall that was more than 2 meters thick. Rumble. The silent sound of collapsing echoed in the basement. The nightmares stepped on the air, and with traces of flames, they crashed through the basement wall and rushed all the way to the surface. Terror Knight, Legendary, Grade 5. Challenge rating, 16 monster level, 24 high undead. Highest and lowest attributes, 25, 15, total attribute points, 95 to 110. Special abilities, Beheading Sword, Legendary, Advanced Charge, Nightmare Mount, Summon the Undead, Blasphemous Language, Aura of Fear, Aura of Death, Abyss Knight, Destructive Attack, Slash, Sword Form, Beheading, Sword Form, Waste Slash, Sword Form, Depraved Cross. Difficulty, A+. Nightmare, Demon, Grade 4. Challenge rating, 12 monster level, 18 large otherworld creature. Highest and lowest attributes, 21, 12 total attribute points, 90 to 100. Special abilities, Flaming Hoof, Advanced Charge, Dark Vision, Flying Run, Powerful Tackle, Demon Resistance, Otherworld Creature. Difficulty, A-. It was a quiet night. After a long and arduous journey, they finally arrived at the campsite. Everyone couldn't help but cheer. Finally they could take a break. Although it was almost midnight, the workers still took the time to get water and start a fire. They also put some food into a big pot to cook. They had been eating dry food for the whole day, and now they just wanted to drink some hot soup and have a good sleep. The caravan guard still didn't dare to let down their guard. They began to arrange for people to keep watch and at the same time, set up a simple security line. The water source was a place where wild beasts gathered. Under normal circumstances they shouldn't camp here. But since it was the arrangement of the mistress, they could only follow her orders. There were only 2 people in the team who were uneasy. One of them was Soren. He didn't expect the mysterious woman to be a witch whose profession level was above 16. Could be said that she was half a step into the realm of legendary. There weren't many witches like her in the entire north. At the very least they were members of the Witch Council. Their status was equivalent to a small city lord in the southern dukedom. There was no reason for such a noble wizard to escort a caravan. Normally, even if there were witches in a caravan, their profession level wouldn't be higher than 12. Many caravans have been attacked in the past. Unless she had a special mission. If she really did have a special mission, then it might not be a good thing for Soren and Vivian to follow the caravan. It was very likely that they would be involved in other dangerous situations. The other person who was uneasy was the mistress of the caravan. She kept looking in the direction of Amber City, as if something terrible was about to happen. There was a faint trace of worry on her face. Time passed little by little. The workers prepared food for the night. The caravan guards took turns to eat. Soren was also given a bowl of fragrant soup. Perhaps she was really tired today. The little girl ate very quickly, and there was a trace of sleepiness on her delicate face. Soren didn't eat anything. First he set up a tent for camping. Then he scattered some powder that repelled poisonous insects around the tent. Finally he carried the sleepy Vivian into the tent. However, just as Soren was about to eat something, he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Suddenly, as if he had a lingering fear, he raised his head and looked in the direction of Amber City. He pulled out his scimitar in an instant and ran up the hill not far away. The mistress of the caravan was one step ahead of him. In the distance, the sky was burning red. It looked like a huge cloud of fire had appeared in the middle of the night. At this moment, they were already hundreds of miles away from Amber City. They couldn't see the area covered by the cloud of fire, but they knew that it was happening in Amber City. A level 9 spell. Meteor Burst, Legendary. Spellcaster level 20. This was not the first time Soren had seen this spell, but when he saw it again he could not help but feel a little shocked in his heart. This was the easiest legendary spell to learn, Ninth Circle. It required a wizard to have a profession level of 20. A professional once calculated the damage of this spell, and it was equivalent to 8 Tomahawk missiles, land, bombarding a target within a 5-kilometer radius. At that time, a legendary warrior joked that if he could resist this spell, he could resist an air-to-ground missile attack in real life. Among all professions, only legendary warriors and barbarians dared to say that they could resist a level 9 spell. Back then, the first warrior to become a legendary warrior took a video of him bathing in lava, and it shocked many people. Warriors were once considered to be the most miserable profession, and it was only then that a period of explosive growth was ushered in. Unfortunately, there were too few warriors who could reach the legendary realm alive. Chapter 37. Amber City. The once bustling city was now in ruins. Flames burned everywhere, and weak cries for help could be heard from the collapsed buildings. Unfortunately, no one was there to save these pitiful commoners. Dark shadows lingered in the burning ruins, and blue soul flames appeared in the eyes of the pale skeletons. Corpses came back to life one after another in the blasphemous language. They picked up their weapons and walked towards the only place in Amber City that was still intact. The Temple District. This was the only part of Amber City that was still intact. The temples of the gods emitted a faint light, and the statues of the gods were covered in a layer of spiritual light. The temple guards stood at the front, and behind them were the surviving Amber City guards. Even the once gentle and elegant priests who loved to preach had taken off their robes and put on heavy armor. They were not pure spellcasters, but they also had decent melee skills. The priestess who had helped Soren before was among them. She wore a silver half-body armor and held a knight's shield in her hand. Her weapon was a 3-foot-long flail. This weapon was very difficult to use, and its lethality was also top-notch. She had once received specialized combat training, but when it came to choosing a weapon, none of the other weapons were as comfortable as a flail. That was why she had chosen this unique and dangerous weapon to wield. The slender priestess wore a silver half-body armor, held a knight's shield in one hand, and held a heavy flail in the other. Such a scene was visually shocking. However, it also showed how dangerous the situation was. Even the non-official priests had to participate in the battle. Behind them were the few survivors of Amber City. These survivors hid in the temples and shivered, waiting for their final fate. The blasphemous language was still echoing in the air. Among the evil fallen, there were even more evil blasphemous priests. They were using blasphemous language to weaken the divine protection of the temple. The 8 dread knights circled around the temple area. The nightmares beneath them spewed out flames with the smell of sulfur. Countless undead wandered around the area. The dead that were resurrected by the blasphemous language would disappear at dawn the next day. However, they might not be able to wait until then. The temple's power was getting weaker and weaker. The Terror Knight commanded the nightmares to get closer. Even though they were still anxious, the nightmares were getting closer and closer to the temple. This was a terrifying existence that they could not match. 8 legendary-level terror knights. Even if Amber City used up all of its forces, they would not be able to defeat them. Despair shrouded the ruined city. Fear. It was everywhere. However, just as everyone had given up hope and was preparing to welcome their final fate, a strange commotion suddenly occurred in the distance. The priests began to comfort the others, telling them that even if death befell them, their souls would return to the kingdom of God, where they would live a peaceful and eternal life. The guardian knights of the temple had already begun to kneel down and pray. They were pleading for the blessings of the gods and vowed to fight until the last moment. As long as the power of the temple was not desecrated, their souls would not be contaminated. Suddenly, one of the Amber City guards had a look of disbelief on his face as he pointed to the front and shouted, "Look over there." An inconspicuous figure appeared in the darkness. He had a bald head with not a single strand of hair on it. He was only wearing tattered clothes made of coarse cloth and simple leggings. He did not have any weapons in his hands. However, he was surrounded by countless undead. Groups of undead attacked him in a frenzy. The ghosts stretched out their claws at him, while the skeletons swung their swords at him. However, he did not seem to care at all. When these attacks landed on him, they did not cause any ripples. Not even a single hair on his body was harmed. He just calmly looked in front of him, and when he saw the survivors of the temple, he showed a hint of relief. "At least I'm still in time." He sighed in a low voice and then stomped his foot, causing an invisible wave of air to erupt. Hundreds of skeletons and ghosts around him were sent flying. The ground cracked in all directions like a spider web, and in the rumbling sound of the ground collapsing, all the stone slabs within 100-meter radius with him as the center were reduced to tiny pieces of stone. Transcendent and saintly. Pastor Phil had a look of disbelief on his face. He looked in front of him and suddenly shouted, "Form a defensive formation. Divine buff. Hold on until dawn and we'll be saved." A legendary monk. The inconspicuous figure that appeared in front of them was a legendary monk, and it was the rarest ascetic monk. Does not wear any armor, does not use any weapons. 1-inch punch, legendary. The inconspicuous monk that appeared in the darkness suddenly leaped forward, crossing a distance of tens of meters. He clenched his fist and punched at the skeleton knight in front of him. The skeleton knight that was awakened by the blasphemous words trembled. The undead armor on its body did not change at all, but the bones in its body shattered inch by inch, turning it into a pile of broken bones. Flaming sun. Facing the undeads that were coming from all directions, the monk clasped his palms together, and then a scorching flame burst out from his palms. When he struck out with his palms, the air around him exploded with a dull sound, and a surging heat wave spread out along with the scorching flame. The strong air wave blew the surrounding sand and stones, and the nearby undeads were also sent flying more than 10 meters away. The low-grade skeletons fell down in batches. The blasphemous priests finally discovered the monk's existence. 3 of them walked out and began to cast spells. Several evil lights appeared one after another, and shot towards the monk in the distance. Shadow Moon. The monk's expression did not change at all. He suddenly put his palms together and his skin turned golden. A silver-white energy field appeared, and directly resisted all the spells. Then he suddenly jumped and his figure disappeared into thin air. Ethereal form. Traceless steps. The monk's figure appeared in front of the blasphemous priests in an instant, and directly shouted with a palm strike. Mage armor master. Stone skin. An invisible energy field appeared around the blasphemous priests, and in an instant, it blocked the monk's attack. At the same time, his body turned into a stone color, and his whole body was wrapped in it. The nearby blasphemy oracles began to cast spells rapidly, covering them with another energy deflection field. Vajra palm. The monk withdrew his palm, and when he punched out again, his palm turned golden. Accompanied by a crisp cracking sound, the energy field around the blasphemous priests was instantly shattered. At the same time, the stone skin on his body cracked and collapsed in the blink of an eye. With just the power of a palm strike, a blasphemous priest's sternum was completely caved in, and all the bones in his body were shattered, and he fell to the ground like mud. A group of stupid spellcasters. Do you really think a layer of stone skin and an energy shield can block our attacks? In the darkness, an incomparably strong figure walked out. Along with his footsteps, the ground could not help but tremble. It was a majestic man about 2.4 meters tall. Just the size of his arm was already the size of a person's waist. He carried a heavy axe in one hand and it was probably more than 600 pounds. It was as heavy as a door plank and just like that, he casually walked into the encirclement of the undead. "Leave this to me," the majestic man said and then suddenly hammered his own chest. His originally abnormally strong body, which was already abnormally strong, began to expand. Terrifying muscles and ferocious blue veins appeared, and with a crackling sound, the bones in his body grew one by one, and his whole body became a 3-meter-tall behemoth. Berserk. But this was not the end. Accompanied by a wild growl, he fiercely hammered the ground. His already exaggerated body size began to explode once again. Legendary Berserk. The ground cracked under the terrifying power, and the majestic figure had turned into a 5-meter-tall giant. The axe that was not very symmetrical was now just right in his hand. Terrifying muscles filled with endless power covered his entire body, and ferocious earthworm-like veins appeared on his tough skin. He looked like an ancient killing machine. SPD. An incomparably wild roar that resounded through the heavens and earth erupted. With this horrifying figure as the center, the skeletons within a 50-meter radius were directly shattered into skeletons. The nearby blasphemous priests screamed miserably, and traces of blood seeped out of their ears, eyes, and nostrils. They seemed to have gone mad and they just lay on the ground with idiotic smiles on their faces. War roar, legendary. Sound wave attack. The 5-meter-tall giant rested his heavy axe on his shoulder. He glanced at the blasphemous priests who had turned into idiots and mocked, "What a bunch of weak spellcasters." Endurance failed. Earth-shattering slash. The giant stomped his foot and a crack appeared on the ground. The place where the blasphemous priests were standing collapsed, and the rubble completely buried the weak spellcasters. Asterisk thud thud thud. Asterisk the sound of heavy hooves echoed in the ruins. When he saw the dread knight in front of him, the legendary barbarian's face showed a hint of seriousness. He slowly put down the heavy axe and licked his lips. Finally, a worthy opponent has appeared. Undying rage. A blood-red aura covered his skin. The barbarian roared and swung his axe at the dread knight in front of him. Asterisk clang. Asterisk a heavy executioner's sword firmly blocked the attack of the axe. The nightmare lord let out a painful cry, and the horse's hooves sank deep into the ground. The dread knight slowly dismounted from his warhorse, and his blood-red eyes stared at the barbarian in front of him. He tore off the blood-stained cloak on his body, and his black-scaled armor changed from one hand to two, and the heavy executioner's sword was held horizontally in front of his chest. The real battle. Until now it had only just begun. Class skill, legendary rage, strength +10, constitution +10, immune to all mind control spells, immune to labyrinth, immune to imprisonment, unlimited stamina for the duration. Class skill, transcendence. After a long period of training, the monk's body has gradually been trained to perfection. His body has become a supernatural existence. Any non-supernatural physical attack will not be able to harm the monk. The monk is immune to all normal weapon attacks. Only rare weapons +1 or above or enchanted weapons can harm him. Chapter 38. The night passed quickly. When Soren woke up the next day, the caravan seemed to be the same as before, but he knew that some things had completely changed. For example, Amber City. Perhaps there would be no more of this city in the future, because he finally remembered where he had heard of its name. It was a battle of the legendary realm. Legendary professions would appear on the stage of history from this night, and the battle between them and the children of God had just begun. At this moment, Soren just wanted to stay as far away from them as possible. As a former legendary rogue, he knew too well the difference between the legendary realm and the non-legendary realm. When he was still a level 19 rogue, it could be said that he was still in the range of mortals and there was not much change at all. However, when he became a level 20 legendary rogue, he already had the ability to travel between the material plane and the shadow plane, and he could directly travel through space with his powerful spell-like abilities. Even dimensional anchor could not lock onto him. If it were not for the fact that he could only travel between the shadow plane and the material plane once a day, he would probably be able to go anywhere in the world. The monks, transcendence, the barbarians, legendary berserk, the priests, summon angel, and so on. The abilities of the legendary realm were already close to the range of the gods. Even the warriors who had always been suffering had made a breakthrough. Legendary tenacity allowed them to bathe in lava before coming out, and legendary fortify allowed them to fight head-on with dragons. If it was a legendary grand sword saint, it would be even more exaggerated. The Blade Storm, Advanced Whirlwind, would be directly immune to all spells below the 6th circle, and its lethality would make other professions ashamed. Of course, it was best not to provoke the legendary wizards because many of them could time stop, at least not before getting the demigod divinity. Immune to legendary time spells. Soren wanted to keep a distance from them. At least before he was strong enough, he wanted to stay as far away from these dangerous existences as possible to avoid being implicated and dying without knowing why. He did not ponder for long. Because some movements outside had awakened everyone, a big guy had come near their camp. It was an adult saber-toothed tiger. The king of beasts in the wilderness. When there was a lack of food, it would even include the drake, challenge rating 10, into its menu. One of the most dangerous felines in the world. When Soren appeared, the others were obviously scared out of their wits. Some of the merchants were so scared that they fell to the ground. It was an adult male saber-toothed tiger with a body length of 4.5 meters, a tail length of 2.7 meters, a shoulder height of about 2 meters, and a weight of about 800 to 1,000 kilograms. Its appearance was not much different from other tiger-type creatures, but it had a pair of saber-toothed teeth that were about 15 centimeters long in its mouth. This was an innate +3 extraordinary dagger that could be used with simple polishing. It had an extremely powerful penetrative ability, and it was a good item that many thieves dreamed of. The king of the wastelands came to the side of the lake, its extraordinary intelligence allowing it to stare intently at the humans before it. After looking at it for a while, it lost interest and lowered its head to drink water by the lake. The guards of the caravan nearby were a little frightened at first, but then some of them were eager to try. Some of them even carefully took out strong crossbows. Perhaps to them, it was not impossible for them to deal with a saber-toothed tiger since they had already killed several ankegs. Don't be impulsive. Soren quickly reached out to stop them, then looked at the captain and said in a deep voice, "This is a saber-toothed tiger. Its diet even includes earth dragons," Zhang Heng said. "Are you really going to let these impulsive fellows attack it?" A saber-toothed tiger that weighed a ton. It was obviously close to the level of a supernatural creature. If it were to undergo a further elemental mutation, it would be able to directly cross the realm and enter outer space. Attacking it would be suicidal. Normal saber-toothed tigers were level 12, but the one in front of them was at least level 16. Unless the mysterious mistress intervened, everyone here would not be enough to fill the gaps between its teeth. "Do you see those gleaming sharp claws?" Soren pointed and said in a serious tone, "Those claws can tear chainmail apart. Even the subspecies of land dragons can't withstand more than a few hits. Don't disturb it. A king of the wastelands like this will not lack food. As long as you don't provoke it, it will leave after drinking." Soren's judgment was correct. The saber-toothed tiger quietly left after drinking, but before it left, it looked at the carriage in the middle. The captain was obviously angry, and he pulled out the impulsive fellows to teach them a lesson. Soren's expression was very serious. He seemed to have thought of something and silently looked in the direction of a forest, then said, "This is the south. You are not familiar with this place, so it's best not to act rashly. The saber-toothed tiger is a creature of the same level as the winter wolves. An adult male saber-toothed tiger can directly challenge a small group of winter wolves. If it weren't for the fact that there are so many winter wolves, the north would be their territory." Winter wolves. They were large supernatural beasts that had the ability to speak. They could speak the common language and the language of giants, and they could spit out frost attacks. They had excellent sensory tracking abilities, and their intelligence was similar to that of ordinary humans. However, they were very cunning and cruel. The winter wolf was one of the most dangerous creatures in the tundra. Its fur could be sold for 2,000 kindler in the north, and 3,000 kindler in the south. It was one of Soren's favorite prey. If it weren't for the winter wolf, it would have been very difficult for him to earn enough money to become a legendary rogue in such a short time. As for the saber-toothed tiger, it could be regarded as half a legendary warrior. However, a king of the wastelands like the saber-toothed tiger was very rare. Logically speaking, it shouldn't have appeared in this area. Didn't they like to roam the plains with wild cows? Could it be that something forced it to migrate? Creatures like the saber-toothed tiger were rarely forced to leave their territory. Even if they encountered a dragon subspecies, they would still fight with their lives on the line, unless there was something they couldn't compete with. Could it be? Soren calculated his position, and his expression suddenly became very ugly. He found that he wasn't far from where the ancient red dragon appeared. The ancient red dragon only appeared a few months later. However, this didn't mean that it didn't appear in the vicinity a few months ago. It was just that it wasn't discovered until then. It seemed that a lot of big events were brewing in advance. The time when they were known to the world was just that they happened to erupt during that time period. Big Brother. He didn't know when the little girl had gotten up. She glanced at the direction where the saber-toothed tiger left, but there was no fear on her face. Instead, she held Soren's hand and said with great interest, "That big cat is so beautiful and mighty. Vivian also wants to raise one in the future." Soren, who looked a little nervous, smiled and patted her little head. He jokingly said, "When Vivian becomes a sorcerer, she can sign a magic pet. Maybe I can really sign a contract with such a majestic big cat." The little girl was still very confused. She had never seen a tiger before, and there were no tigers around Amber City. She had never left Amber City before, and it was her first time seeing a tiger. She didn't expect that she would think that it was a big cat. But she wasn't wrong. The saber-toothed tiger was also a cat. The little girl didn't notice that Soren was joking. Instead, she looked at the tiger seriously and said happily, "Really? Then it can carry me everywhere to play. If anyone dares to bully me, I'll let it bite them. It's so big. It must be very strong when it comes to fighting." Soren didn't interrupt the little girl's naive fantasy. He reached out and picked her up, put her on the carriage and said casually, "Well then, Vivian, you'll have to work hard. A big cat like that won't listen to you so easily." After that, he began to pack his things. There were still 4 or 5 days of travel to Whiterun, and it wouldn't be a peaceful journey. Soren was busy tidying up the tent and preparing breakfast. The cute little girl tilted her head and sat on the side of the carriage. She held her chin with one hand and muttered to herself, "How can I make that big cat listen to me? It's so big and I'm so small. There's no way I can beat it. What should I do?" The little girl rubbed her head in frustration. It seemed that she really didn't know what to do. "Sigh. It would be great if I could raise a big cat like that." The fur on its body looked warm. The little girl was still in a daze, but the mysterious mistress of the caravan had already walked up to her. Chapter 39. By the time Soren had finished packing his luggage, the mysterious mistress had already left. He glanced at the mysterious woman in the distance, squatted down and whispered, "Vivian. What did she say to you?" The little girl did not hide anything from him. She tilted her head and answered, "Nothing much. She just asked me how old I am. Then she asked me if I can read." "Don't worry. I didn't tell her that I can cast spells." Soren nodded. It was best not to let anyone know that Vivian was a natural-born warlock. She was still too young. Soren had no ill feelings towards the mysterious mistress of the caravan, but he was still worried about her. Wizards were all eccentric creatures, and the conflict between rogues and spellcasters was not something that could be resolved in a day or two. None of the native wizards in the storyline were simple characters. The trade caravan continued its journey. Perhaps it was because of the conversation with the mysterious mistress, but the little girl suddenly became interested in learning how to read. Soren also felt that she should learn more words. Not all of the abilities of a warlock were automatically awakened. Unlike dragons, they could not automatically awaken their knowledge. Warlocks needed to learn how to read and write on their own, while dragons could automatically learn a lot of languages and words. Vivian had learned some words from Soren in the past, but the number of words she learned was less than 100. The little girl was actually very smart, and her learning speed was even faster than Soren's. However, she still liked to do things that she liked to do. Sometimes she would feel sleepy when she looked at things with a lot of words. Sometimes she would even yawn. The trade caravan slowed down a little today. The little girl still did not like things with a lot of words. After learning a few dozen new words from Soren, she started to feel sleepy. She mumbled a few words to Soren, then giggled and told him that she would learn next time. After that, she started to play with the little things that the others gave her. In just one day, the little girl had become very popular in the trade caravan. Some of the little things were given to her by the trade caravan workers, while some were toys given to her by the mysterious mistress. For example, a set of exquisite tarot cards. Vivian liked things with pictures on them. Half a day passed just like that. They saw some gnolls and gnomes along the way, but none of them had the guts to attack such a large caravan. The caravan didn't stop until there was a commotion in front of them. Soren wanted to earn more slaughter EXP, so he went to take a look as well. But this time he didn't have the chance to make a move. The caravan met a person. An adventurer traveling alone in the wilderness. It was an ordinary-looking middle-aged man. He had a square face, thick eyebrows and big eyes. He was dressed in ordinary gray clothes. His arms were wrapped in bandages and his legs were tied up. His hair was very short, and his neck was much thicker than most people's. This meant that he might have been trained in a special way of fighting, such as the war roar, a special ability that was similar to the lion's roar. When Soren saw him, the merchant guards were talking to him from afar. There were 3 dead gnolls near him, all killed by his bare hands. A fist master? Soren looked at the middle-aged man in surprise. He then dismounted from his horse and put his hands together. Are you traveling alone? The middle-aged man returned the salute and bowed his head. He looked very humble. The merchant guard saw Soren's actions and relaxed a little. The captain of the guards rode over and whispered, "Who is he?" Someone saw him fighting the gnolls. He killed 3 of them with his bare hands. The other gnolls ran away. Soren nodded and explained, "This should be a fist master. He's a warrior monk. They like to wander alone in the wilderness, looking for opportunities to sharpen their will and strength. This one seems to be an ascetic." A warrior monk? An ascetic? The captain's expression relaxed a little. Most ascetics weren't evil people. A fist master was an advanced profession of a warrior monk. They had completely given up on weapons and were proficient in bare-handed attacks. Only fist masters and holy fist guards could master the powerful ability, one-inch punch. A warrior monk was one of the professions that liked to travel alone in the wilderness because they needed to sharpen their will in the wilderness. At the same time they could feel the power of emptiness, nirvana and chaos. If they chose the path of an ascetic, they would also have a special sacred ritual, which was to donate all their wealth to the poor. An ascetic would donate most of their wealth and keep only a small amount of material wealth for themselves to sharpen their will. This was one of the professions with the highest will attribute. They were almost immune to most charm and mind spells. At the same time, because they gave up material wealth, their faith became stronger. Very few people could become ascetics. This was because they had to make a special vow. If they broke it, it could even lead to a flaw in their mind. In other words, it was the so-called self-deception. If a powerful professions were to fall into such a situation, there would be an obvious flaw in their will, and their strength would be greatly affected. Only 1 out of 10 warrior monks would become an ascetic. Only 1 out of 10 ascetics would become an ascetic monk. This was the most difficult profession to advance. Because ascetics would not keep overnight wealth, many of them completely gave up weapons and rare equipment and reached the highest achievement of a fist master. One-inch punch, legendary. They did not use any weapons, did not wear any equipment, and only relied on their strong intuition and hands to fight. This group of people's magic resistance was very exaggerated, and they had some very special abilities. These abilities were gradually comprehended in a long period of cultivation. Many of them relied on their own strong willpower, honed in a difficult environment, and finally directly interfered with the elemental energy of the material world. Many ascetics gave up in the end because not everyone could resist the temptation of material things. Once cultivation was given up, the ascetics became ordinary warrior monks, and they might not have the courage to try again in their lifetime. Soon the caravan had an additional companion. The fist master seemed to be very quiet and almost did not take the initiative to talk to others. This was not very strange. Some ascetics even pretended to be mute and did not say a word for several years. In the afternoon, he would beg the others in the caravan just some water and simple food. He refused most meat and only ate coarse black bread. It was not that ascetics did not eat meat. But when they began a period of cultivation, travel, unless it was a special situation, they only ate the simplest and coarsest food. This kind of cultivation could take up to several years, and often after completing it once, their strength would be significantly improved. At that time, many people tried to cultivate. Unfortunately, they all failed in the end. The players could not bear this kind of life at all. They would rather challenge some powerful monsters and directly use slaughter EXP to level up. Warrior monks were not rare in this world. Their cultivation method had been accepted by more and more people, and even integrated with some of the sword saints' training methods, and finally produced the current weapon master profession. The only difference was that they changed from fighting barehanded to specializing in a certain weapon. This group of people had strong willpower. Some of the priests would also try to train in a similar way to strengthen the strength of their beliefs. This fist master had no sense of presence. Until evening, he did not take the initiative to say a word to anyone. He just silently followed the caravan. He did not ride a horse and even rejected the horses that were offered by kind people. He walked all the way, but his walking speed was very fast, and his endurance was much better than ordinary people. Could be said that he walked as if he was flying, and he easily caught up with the caravan. When it was evening, he did not need to rest in a tent, and he did not even need to get close to the bonfire. He just found a stone and sat cross-legged. Then he stopped moving. The second day of the journey could be said to be very peaceful. Other than the appearance of this fist master, there was almost no trouble on the road. When Soren woke up on the third day, the fist master was still sitting on the stone, and the caravan guards nearby were pointing at him with obvious surprise and shock on their faces. Obviously, the warrior training they received was very difficult, but it was not to such an extreme extent. Only the captain of the guards had a thoughtful expression on his face. That was because his training as a northern barbarian was also very extreme. He had to immerse his entire body in ice water that was below 0 degrees Celsius in order to suppress his violent power. At that time he had almost lost his life. He did not move for the whole night. The next day the fist master's body was covered with dew, and because of the cold weather, there was a faint white frost on his eyebrows. At this time, the others finally understood why Soren had a trace of respect for him. This was indeed not a training method that ordinary people could endure. In fact, the normal training of a monk was not much different from that of a warrior, but the advanced class of an ascetic was more special. The way they trained themselves was more extreme, and it was completely through the most difficult way to uncover their potential. There was a succubus queen in the abyss. Even many gods couldn't resist her charm magic, but the legendary monk could directly ignore it. One could imagine how strong their willpower was. The fist master left in the afternoon of the third day. This was because Soren and the others were close to a small town, which was close to the city of Whiterun. It would take them at most 2 days to reach there. Ascetics did not go near crowded places when they trained, and they preferred to train in deserted areas. He planned to go to a large waterfall in the northwest and train there for a year to find an opportunity to learn the ethereal body, and pursue the opportunity to become a legendary monk, and finally master the legendary, divine transcendence. Until he left, no one knew his name, as if he was just a passerby on their journey. However, for some reason he gave Vivian a book. It was not a secret martial arts book. There was no such thing as a secret martial arts book in this world. It was just a book called Hand-to-Hand Mastery and One-Inch Punch. Just like the warrior's advanced slashing techniques and finding the enemy's weakness, the wizard's enhancing and flexible use of evocation spells, the priest's the influence of faith on divine spells, and the paladin's the divine power of faith. These books were written by many people, and if one trained according to the methods written in the book, they could learn some additional abilities. For example, the thief's special skills for picking locks. If one carefully read this book, they could improve their picking skills a little, and if they were lucky they could even learn the ability, lock-picking expert. The book given by the fist master. If one trained according to the methods written in the book and met the training requirements, they could obtain the hand-to-hand mastery ability, and then meet the requirements to become a monk. In the end, they could try to learn the ability, One-Inch Punch. However, how could Soren let Vivian become a monk, which was a difficult profession? The training methods of this profession were too difficult. So he put it away and threw it into his multi-dimensional bag. Vivian should just be a fair, rich, and beautiful sorcerer. Besides, he could not let the little girl train alone in the wilderness. He could not bear to let her suffer. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.